Okay, so we just want to provide a brief overview of the day's business. The committee will receive oral evidence from the Minister for Infrastructure to receive an update on her ministerial priorities and legislative programme. We're going to receive oral evidence from the Department for Infrastructure on Northern Ireland Water Forensic Financial Review. We're going to consider a public consultation on the grant scheme for the supervision and inspection requirements of the Reservoirs Act Northern Ireland 2025, and we're going to consider a public consultation on shaping sustainable places. So just for those that are in the public gallery, you're very, very welcome to the Infrastructure Committee today. You can use your mobile devices through a Wi-Fi connection. All devices should be muted. 3G, 4G and 5G should not be used, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken. If members are content, we'll proceed through the agenda as follows. You content? Yeah. Don't think we've any apologies today. We've Mark Durkin and Nicola Brogan joining us today on line. Declarations of interest to remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members of interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any members have any interest that they wish to declare? I just want to declare that my husband's family are landowners along the route of the A5. Okay, members, if you're content, I'm going to take item 7 first, which is the Minister, who I believe has arrived. So we're just going to bring the Minister in now, and I just remind members to work with me. We have an hour and a half with the Minister today. Hello, Minister.
How are you?
Hello, Permanent Secretary. You're very welcome to the Infrastructure Committee today. There's a lot to discuss certainly today, so you're very welcome. Members, just you will see at page 239 the Clerk's memo, page 242 the Minister for Infrastructure update correspondence, page 244 the official report ministerial priorities and legislative programme, Minister for Infrastructure 26th of February. And I'm just seeking agreement that the evidence is recorded by Hansard. All agreed?
Great.
Okay, thank you. So, Minister, first of all, I just want to express disappointment. First of all, after your session, we will have a session on the forensic accountant. We still do not have the report. And as you'll be aware, as a committee, there is measures that are in place to provide committees with embargoed reports. And even in our packs today, we have restricted papers. And I suppose it's just a disappointment that it curtails our work as a scrutiny committee in terms of looking into a very important document, which is looking at the funding of NI Water. And I would just like to ask, do you know the reasons why the committee hasn't received that report as of yet, even under a circumstance of an embargoed report?
I'm actually not sure.
I'm happy to speak on that one, Minister. So the report is still in the process of being finalised. There's a final version that's to come back to us, so there isn't actually even a final report at this stage. But we thought it would be important to come up and brief the committee as soon as possible to make sure that we could give you whatever information we could. And certainly Declan and the team who are coming up afterwards will be happy to give as full a briefing as possible and immediately send it to the committee. And I don't think there would have been anything, certainly as officials, we'd have been happy to send it to the Minister if it was ready to go. And I'm sure the Minister would have been happy to send it to the committee on that basis, but it just wasn't ready to go at this stage. But we thought it would be important to give you early and to give us as well with the Minister's briefing of the Assembly to make sure that we were giving you as much as we could as early as possible.
Yeah, I suppose just obviously the announcement was made this week in the Chamber around the key themes, and as a committee point of view, I'm not saying that I distrust officials coming up, and I'm sure that they will be open and transparent whenever they come to the committee, of course, but from a committee point of view there may be some elements within that report that the committee may wish to question, which may not come out in evidence session today. So it is an extreme disappointment because we have as a committee seen papers come late to this committee in very recent weeks as well, not least the budget, which is a key part of our scrutiny work as well. So I'd like to think that that wouldn't be the case going forward again.
I could just say as well that obviously it's out of our control waiting for that to come back. So as soon as we have it, then the committee will have it. But so that is why it hasn't been provided, because we don't have it back yet. But what I will say is that, I mean, I'm sure there's an opportunity, if there are further questions once that is received, that we can look at a further briefing if that's required. I can't see much changing from what we have seen so far. I mean, I've seen a draft, and that's what this week my statement was based on, because it's based on exactly what PwC have been reporting on. But obviously between ourselves and NI Water, there's some factual accuracy checks and things that had to happen, and that's why we're just waiting on the finalised version. But as soon as that's available, we'll ensure that it's sent to the committee.
Okay, well, look, without further ado, as I say, I think we've an hour and a half with you today, and there's a lot of issues. We could spend all day talking about the matters that relate to infrastructure. So, Minister, if you don't mind, I will be strict with a 5-minute briefing from yourself, if that's okay, and then I'll come to members' questions after that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair, and thank you again to the committee for inviting me back. I'm delighted to be here, and as I said, it has been, particularly this week, and I think we've had numerous sessions where we have had questions. I've question time, and obviously the statements that have been in the chamber this week. Today, I'm here to provide an update on the progress we've made since my last appearance in February at committee, and I suppose just to reaffirm my commitment to working constructively with you all. I deeply value the role that the committee plays in scrutinising the department's work, and having seen the work that the committee have done so far, I really welcome the scrutiny that there has been, and welcome the ideas and the challenges, and also the support as we strive to deliver better infrastructure for everyone collaboratively. As you all know, infrastructure is not just about roads or bridges or buildings or physical infrastructure. It's about people, and it's about connecting communities, enabling economic growth, protecting our environment, and improving quality of life. I've now been in post for just over 4 months, and in that time I do think we've made meaningful progress across several areas, but of course, like everything, there's still much more to do. We now have an agreed programme for government and a budget, and I hope to confirm my department's allocation shortly. As you may recall, I previously outlined 7 foundation areas that I intend to prioritise during my time in office, which include adapting to climate change, better roads, cleaner and greener, water and wastewater, and including people. And given the limited time today, I'd just like to highlight some progress in these 5 areas. In terms of adapting to climate change, Stormy Owen in January reminded us all of the critical role the department plays during severe weather events, and the urgent need to adapt our infrastructure to a changing climate. And I'm pleased to report the completion of the £33 million Belfast Tidal Flood Alleviation Scheme, which will protect over 3,000 homes and businesses now and for future generations. We also remember the devastating floods that happened in Newry and Downpatrick in autumn 2023, and in response, my department has recently published the Downpatrick flood study and is actively engaging with local stakeholders to identify the best long-term solutions for this area, and we continue to work right across the board on other flood alleviation initiatives. In terms of cleaner and greener, in February I announced the next steps for the Belfast Rapid Transit 2 project, which will eventually connect all corners of Belfast City, north, south, east and west, with high quality public transport, and this includes extending the G2 route to Queen's University and to the City Hospital. And I remain committed to encouraging more people to walk, cycle, wheel and to use public transport. We've continued to invest in greenways and sustainable travel. Last year, my department wrote to councils inviting them to submit proposals for greenway and active travel related projects to be considered for capital funding support. 7 projects have now been identified, and I'm delighted to allocate 1.9 million to help those councils deliver on their priorities for active travel. A significant step this year was relocating the department's headquarters from Clarence Court to James House. Clarence Court was built in an era of car dependency and had over 250 staff parking spaces. James House, by contrast, reflects our modern transport policy with virtually no car parking available. And this move has prompted a major shift in commuting habits, encouraging my own staff to embrace public transport and active travel. As members will also be aware, this week I've launched the new transport strategy. Climate considerations, technological advances and changing lifestyles mean that we need to think differently about what transport will look like in the next 10 years and beyond. The draft strategy 2035 sets out a comprehensive vision that's both actionable and adaptable, but that addresses both urban and rural connectivity, creates a cleaner and greener foundation for growth, and recognises my commitment to improving regional balance. The strategic priorities for the next 10 years closely align with my department's foundations for a better future, in that they address the need for cleaner, greener modes of travel while putting people and inclusivity at the heart of everything we do. And I would encourage as many people as possible to engage with the consultation, which will help shape a transport system that works for all and safeguards the environment for future generations. Staying with transport, I think it's also right to acknowledge the tremendous work of the DVA over the last year. Between April 2024 and March 2025, DVA delivered a record 1.16 million MOT vehicle tests, reducing average waiting times from 100 days to around 30 days. I think this is a remarkable achievement and a testament to their dedication, particularly given the challenges over recent years. Water and wastewater is a massive issue, as you will be aware, and modernising our ageing wastewater system remains one of my top priorities, and I'm tackling this through the three-pronged approach which members will be familiar with. My department is about to complete the public consultation on developer contributions, which closes at the end of this week, and I'm pleased that the Executive has agreed to allow me to bring forward the Water Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill, and the bill was introduced to the Assembly on Monday of this week. I know that this is an area which the committee will be working with my officials on, and I look forward to working with you all to deliver this crucially important bill. I'll also continue to work with Executive colleagues and seek every opportunity to increase wastewater investment where possible. You'll also be aware that this week I published the outcome of the work undertaken by the Forensic Accountant for NI Water, as we have talked about, and I know you're about to be briefed on the issue by my Finance Director Susan Anderson following this session today. I'm determined that the learning from this investigation will be useful for both parties, but it's essential that NI Water takes every opportunity where it can to live within its budget. The board needs to factor in affordability to all its decisions, just as the department has to do.
Minister, if you don't mind, I'm sorry that the 5 minutes is up, but if you don't mind, I'm sure that some of the topics that you have there will be discussed during the course of the session. I just want to make sure that members have making use of the time that we have, because there's a number of issues. First of all, I just want to place on record on behalf of the committee, thank you to the staff that work within DFI, all of the local teams who do a tremendous amount of work in very challenging circumstances, it has to be said, given the budget constraints that are placed upon this department. Second of all, it'll come as no surprise that we will be discussing the A5, and from the outset from this committee we want to place on record at the outset our sympathies and our thoughts with all of those people who have lost their lives as a result of incidences along the road, and indeed those who are seriously injured as well, who will be disappointed by the decision that came this week, and I want to very clearly state that at the outset of this meeting. Minister, I'm going to kick off with the A5 decision. It's now a mess. Whose fault is it?
Well, I think in the aftermath, I think the first, as you have said, Chair, my priority and the people that are at the forefront of my mind are the families. This is hugely disappointing. It's heartbreaking because they have worked so hard, campaigned very diligently to ensure that this road is built, based on their own personal heartbreak and the tragedy that has struck many of those families. And I just want to pay credit to them, because that has really kept this project at the forefront of everybody's mind, and that is why it's an executive flagship project. So from my perspective, this is hugely disappointing. Officials provided hundreds and hundreds of pages of scientific evidence, have worked, this is the third legal challenge that has been taken against this major infrastructure project, which will save lives amongst the other benefits that we are all aware it will deliver. So at this point in time, I think it would be irresponsible to try and lay blame with anybody. We need to carefully consider the ruling. It's a very detailed report, it's very complex, and I have been working immediately to look at what that means. As I've said in the chamber this week, officials, my legal team are currently analysing that and will provide briefing later this week to me. I've also met with the Minister for Department of Agriculture, Environment, and looked at we've had initial discussions around the Climate Change Act and some of the comments from the judge in relation to that and how we can remedy those. But as I said, it's still very early stages because there is so much to consider. I think it's extremely important that we do that as thoroughly as possible so that we have a clear analysis of what the ruling means and where we need to go next. I also think it's important to note that there were 7 grounds for this challenge. Only 3 of them have been upheld. So, as I've said earlier in the week, I don't think it's insurmountable. I think that we can overcome this, and that's what I'm determined to do. And I hope that the committee can continue to work with me and with officials and with everybody who is keen to see this road scheme delivered, because we need to move ahead with it. So this is a setback, but I want to ensure that it is a minimal time and that we can get to work as soon as possible.
So on the route, vesting happened in November 2024. A court case then happened just before the end of 2024. Proceedings were lodged then. And within that intervening period of time, work was able to progress. Work was then able to progress along the route of the A5 while the High Court case was running. Who made the decision to do that? Because as I look in my constituency, land has been changed to unrecognisable levels, and there's a clear difference from the last time the High Court ruling happened. So who made that decision to proceed at risk?
So the land was vested and was therefore owned by the department. So the works that had commenced were within the law, and the purpose of that, as I have outlined already in the chamber and previously prior to the judgment this week, was to ensure that we were ready to hit the ground running on the other side of this judgment should it have been a positive outcome. So had we not done that and we had a positive outcome, we were also operating at risk, because that would have further delayed the ability to commence construction, which could have impacted on contractors and then really resulted in higher costs as well. So,
Minister, with all due respect, the last time the High Court ruling or the High Court judgment case took place, the second time, as far as I'm aware, the works along that route were paused while you waited a judgment. This time, works proceeded at risk, and the land has tons of stone now sitting on it. Farmers are now uncertain about the next steps. So who made that decision going forward?
Well, I think, could I add to
Yes,
that, just
course,
Minister,
yeah.
because while the plans, of course, we work under the direction and control of ministers, so while the plans were always there and we were discussing the process, as a counting officer, I have a particular role there as well, because I have to be satisfied that any action we take is value for money, it represents value for money in the round. And I was content not to seek a ministerial direction around any of that, because I felt that actually the project needed to move forward. And so obviously I was looking at the advice provided by officials working with me. But I was part of that decision-making process, and I'm very happy to say so. That's part of, as you say, there was always a danger of costs that would then would be incurred up front. But the greater risk at that stage, looking at it from that point of view, was if we did not proceed with some of the preparatory works, we would be putting the whole project as a risk. And given the value of the project, the biggest project really in the history of Northern Ireland, it was important that we didn't that we proceeded as best we could. So these are always difficult decisions, but you have to, for us, we have to look at the value for money arguments in the round.
And there's now an issue for landowners, and the cost now of getting that land reinstated. I'm sure that will be covered in part of this discussion. But farmers are now counting the cost of their land being unrecognisable and not sure now where to go. But do you accept now that do you accept now that that decision was potentially wrong and is now going to cost the department in terms of the public purse of reinstatement of that land?
I accept that there will be costs associated with that decision. I also accept that, where we're sitting today, having knowing the information that we know today, would I take that decision today? I'm not sure I would, because obviously, well, in fact I wouldn't, because I know the judgment. But at the stage we were at, in terms of officials taking that decision, I'm content that we took the best decision we could at that time, given what we were trying to achieve.
If I could add to that, so as I've outlined is that, there's a cost to doing nothing. There was a significant cost, and that has to be balanced. So at every stage, and I had regular briefings from officials and from legal team in terms of the progress of the case, but also in terms of what the plan was in all eventualities. So that was closely monitored. But what I will say, there will be costs incurred, and that goes without saying. But I think it's very important to put it into perspective to say the cost of doing nothing, particularly in the event of a positive judgment, would have cost far more, not just in terms of pounds and pence, but in terms of lives. So my priority, my predecessor's priority, and the priority of the department was to ensure that should we have got the green light to go ahead, we were ready to go, we had contractors ready to go, that we could get started on this work to ensure that no more lives were lost. So that was the priority throughout.
How much has been incurred to date in terms of money?
Well, we probably need to get the finalised figures on that, because we're in a different space now.
We also need to engage with the
and we need to engage with the
landowners as well, to make sure we understand exactly what the costs are. And of course we will be doing that, as we have been throughout the process. I suppose just
to say, as I said in the chamber yesterday, I think in response to some of your colleagues, was that the next steps now are once, as the judge had ruled to quash the decision and the associated orders, once they are quashed now, then the land will return to those landowners, and letters will go out from the department, as there's quite a number of people that need to be contacted. So, and that will outline the next steps, and there will be further engagement in relation to that.
Will you challenge the High Court's decision?
So as I've said, we're currently working our way through the ruling, and we'll put look at a number of options. I said yesterday as well in the chamber, I mean, nothing's off the table at this point until we get a clear understanding of what the ruling means, what the key issues are, and what the options are to address them. My focus is very clear. It's how we resolve this, and how we move forward, and how we get this road built. So whatever we do, I want to be assured that will get the successful outcome. So as I said, we'll rule nothing in or out at this point.
Minister, I have to say, I thought, you've yesterday in the chamber you seemed quite defiant, and if I dare say buoyant, in relation to getting the A5 delivered. But I'm interested to know how you are going to intend to do that, given the Climate Change Act and the net zero targets that are very fundamental to the High Court judgment. And indeed what your timescale is now going to be surrounding this project, because that's going to be key for construction companies, landowners, your own staff as well, in terms of getting this ship turned around.
No, absolutely, and I make no apologies for being defiant in relation to this. This scheme is far too important, and it is critical as that is delivered. Again, it's an executive flagship project. This is something that all parties agree needs to happen. So I'm determined that we will get it done. But we have to look at what the key issues are. There are lots of assumptions as to what they are at this point, but I will look at that very, very closely and take advice from the legal team and from officials as to how we resolve that. I think it's important to also say that will require collaboration with other departments, given the complexity of the issues that have been raised. And I've already initiated some of that engagement, as I said, with Minister Muir in terms of his role. So I've also met with the A5N2 committee yesterday, as some members may be aware, who represent 5 councils, both north and south, who are impacted by the A5, and we reaffirmed our collective commitment to working together on this and finding the solution. So I think that in terms of a time frame, it's my objective that we get this done in the quickest time possible, but we have to ensure that that's done in a way that we are assured of the most successful outcome. So I think it would be unrealistic to provide a time frame here, but I want the committee to be reassured that this is something that I'll be working night and day to ensure we get over the line at the earliest possible stage.
So you've indicated that you met with the DRA Minister. Is this your first meeting with the DRA Minister in relation to the A5? And you said that was an initial discussion around the Climate Change Act. What was contained within that initial discussion with the Minister around that?
It was my first meeting, but I know that John had previously met towards the end of last year before I came into office. In relation to this, there was evidence provided to the court. I think, as I said earlier, there was thousands of pages of scientific evidence provided, in relation to the Climate Change Act and the issues that the applicant had raised. So in terms of our initial discussions, I mean, I think it's important to say also that we only received a copy of the ruling yesterday. It wasn't provided to us until that, other than through the legal team in court in hard copy on Monday. So this has taken time to go through it, and the Minister also was provided with a copy yesterday. So just having an initial look at the detail of that, we had initial early discussions around what has been mentioned in that, and what actually the Climate Change Act means, what the actual Climate Action Plan, and I suppose kind of considering what the judge's comments refer to and what that would look like in reality. So as I said, still very early. We need to get further advice on that, and from a legalistic point of view as well. But that will remain ongoing, and both I and Minister Muir have committed to doing that going forward.
Okay, just 2 more questions on a different issue from me. Your department has bid for an inescapable resource of 50.1 million and 109.9 million for capital. Your party Stormont leader said that Irish language signs must be part of our future. You signed off on hundreds of thousands of pounds for Grand Central Station. Personally, I think your priorities are misguided whenever your department is bidding for 12 odd million just to keep streetlights on here in Northern Ireland in inescapable during monitoring pressures. So could the Minister detail why she is prioritising the likes of Irish language signs whenever the pressures in terms of funding in her department are so great?
Well, I think we've had this conversation many times, and I suppose just to say from the outset, Irish language is for everyone, and inclusivity is at the heart of everything that my department intends to do. The decision around the bilingual signage at Grand Central Station, I think, was a very positive step forward. It's unfortunate that we now have a legal challenge, and I think it's important to recognise the culture of everybody right across this island, not least in the north. So we will have different opinions in terms of that. There's no doubt about that. I think all ministers have autonomy to look at how they use their budget in a way that reflects the society that we live in. I think it was something that not only is important to people who live here, but also in terms of enhancing tourism. And Grand Central Station, as I've said before, is the largest transport hub on this island, and I think it should be welcoming and inviting to everybody that will be coming through this in the coming years and for many generations. So I think that it's, in the grand scheme of things, it's a relatively small amount of money, and I think, you know, we see how other ministers can also make allocations to reflect people's culture, and we've seen some of that even just this week. And I think that's important that we all do that, because that's reflecting the diversity right across our society and celebrating the culture that all of the citizens that we represent share.
So The decision was cross-cutting in nature. You didn't take that decision to the executive, you took that decision yourself. Do you recognise that it should have been taken to the executive for a decision, and can you confirm the engagement that you've had with other ministers on this issue? Because I understand that the Communities Minister has now joined the legal challenge in relation to Grand Central Station and Irish language signs.
Well, if I had felt that it was cross-cutting, I would have took it to the executive. So obviously the decision not to, because it wasn't recommended to go to the executive for that reason. So if that had
Minister,
been
this is not about you feeling.
No, but
this
if
is
you
about
let me finish, this is also another minister's opinion. So we will work through that through the legal challenge, and I think that's all I'll say in relation to that, because the decision taken, there are lots of other examples. There's already bilingual signage in Uri train station. We have seen it in the Gaeltacht quarter. There are lots of examples. So that's open to interpretation, and I think we leave that for the legal case that is currently ongoing.
Okay, I'm now going to move to the Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and just echoing the Chair's comments regarding the staff on the front lines working for the Department of Infrastructure. I think I can speak for everyone that they are hugely responsive under often very difficult circumstances, so we do appreciate that. Minister, in the last 5 years, over £25 million has been paid out in compensation to road users who have damaged their vehicles, their bikes or their bicycles, hitting potholes. The state of our roads has been described by many as shocking, and it seems to be getting worse. It's a public safety crisis, not just for car users, but also for motorcyclists and for cyclists. What is your strategy to tackle the horrendous state of our roads?
Yeah, no, and I thank you for raising this, John. I think, it's again one of the key issues that is facing the department. It's not a new issue, and something that is undoubtedly very challenging. Our road network is a critical element of the infrastructure that underpins everything that we do on a daily basis, and it is used either directly or indirectly by everyone in that vein. But I think we're all aware of the challenges of maintaining the very large network that we have, given the budgetary constraints. And I know from my own constituency role, as I've said before, particularly representing a large rural area, the challenges around that. The well-discussed funding shortfall and the years of limited service have undoubtedly had an impact on the condition of our roads, and they have continued to deteriorate during that time. And that's why, as I've said in the chamber, we have tried to look at how we could do things differently, and that is through our new roads maintenance strategy. I think that new approach to how the network is maintained is one that will help to focus those limited resources to ensure that we're getting the best out of what we're doing, and we're getting better quality repairs as well as more sustainable repairs. So officials are working on that, and I'm hoping to have a final draft of the strategy in the coming weeks, which I'll then be announcing and sharing with the committee and the Assembly. And I think it's again, just to reiterate, that's about delivering more high quality repairs, but also using modern technology to ensure that we're directing investment where it needs to go, and it's being used to make smarter maintenance decisions. And we all know the kind of the issues around potholes and the depth of potholes, and passing potholes to fix one and then having to come back. So we're trying to take all of that on board, but also about future-proofing our roads to meet the kind of changing needs of society around. We've seen the rollout of further active travel schemes, and trying to that modal shift and decarbonisation of public transport as well. So as well as the increasingly frequent adverse weather events, which also has an impact on roads structures and the demand for maintenance. So for me, I think it's a really positive step forward. Of course, if we could get more money, and that's what I continue to do, is that, like with the wastewater infrastructure issue, to try and get more investment into our roads. I think it's absolutely critical, and if we can do that in such a way that as we are getting more investment, we're maintaining our roads to a higher quality that is more sustainable, hopefully we will see those costs gradually reducing, and that the people we all represent will see the benefits. We've already had a pilot scheme of this in Ards and North Down, and I think it's fair to say, having recently met councillors from that area, they have seen the impact of that. So I hope that shows that the department have been working really hard to find different ways of doing it, but things that will have positive benefits for all of our society, and I look forward to, I suppose, further engagement in that once the strategy is finalised.
Okay, thank you for that, Minister. So you're confident at the back of that new work that people will start to see a noticeable difference? Because I think up to now the frustration, and you alluded to this, is a pothole appears, it gets patched up in a pretty poor job, 3 weeks later another one appears, people that drive past two to fix another one, and there's just this ongoing cycle. The roads are what everybody sees every single day, so it epitomises for them the Department of Infrastructure, even though we know the department is so much more than that. It epitomises the failings often, and I think if people could start to see that positive impacts, that they would be more confident in that. So are you confident that we're going to see noticeable improvements?
I think in terms of the pilot scheme that I referred to there, certainly that has been the initial feedback, that there has been a marked difference. From speaking to some of the councillors that day when we met just last week or the week before, I think it was, they had noted, they were we had a debate in the Assembly around infrastructure funding for that area. They had stated that in previous years they had, it had been a challenge, but in this last year, which is when the pilot scheme has been implemented, they have seen a difference. So for me, I think that's an early indication that this is having an impact. So I look forward to, I suppose, kind of seeing that rolled out further. But as I said, once we see the finalised strategy on the basis of what has happened to date, I'm hoping that we can get that on the ground as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to the legislative agenda then. Time is quickly disappearing in this mandate. Just wanting to get an update on the legislative programme that you're bringing forward, a time frame in each of those pieces of legislation. Are you confident that everything that you'd committed to bring in this mandate will be completed by March or April 2027?
Yeah, so as you'll know then, this week we introduced the Water and Sustainable Drainage Bill, and again I think it's been a positive step on that one. It's another aspect of the work that I'm doing in terms of trying to address the significant wastewater infrastructure issues that we are all acutely aware of. And even just yesterday we met with Fleur Anderson from the British government, and looking at, we had some discussion around that and looking at nature-based solutions and some of the collaborative work we can do with the British government, as well as what we've been doing with the Irish government in relation to that. So I think that in itself is already moving. The Ports and Harbour Bill, which the committee will be aware of, you will know that the review of the Trustport consultation closed on the 10th of March, so responses have been analysed by officials, and a summary report is currently being prepared. So this has been shared with the committee and is on the website, so I'm expecting a policy paper just outlining the potential options available to me within the next few weeks, and if legislative change is required, then I will seek executive agreement in relation to that. So I'm content that if needs be that we are looking at a legislative change, that we will be able to do that within this mandate. And I know from meeting some of the ports, particularly in recent months, that they are keen to see some of those changes as well. The committee will also be aware that I recently announced that I will be introducing legislation in terms of safety on school buses and overtaking school buses. Officials are currently working on that to outline options as to how we progress that, and one of the options will be around amending existing legislation. So again, I am confident that is something that we will be able to deliver within this mandate, and I'm supposed to say that will be as part of a package of measures. I've written to the Education Minister as well in terms of how we can work collaboratively together in ensuring that we are covering different aspects of that road safety, and particularly home to school for children, and especially in rural areas, as we saw the recent tragic death of Caitlin Rose McMullen, and I have met with her mum in relation to that. The Railway and Transport Bill as well, we've just announced the consultation on policy proposals for the bill, which will modernise the regulation of the railways and addressing issues with the operation of the 1967 and 2011 Transport Northern Ireland Acts. I suppose to say the purpose of the proposed bill is to provide new powers for railway regulation and modernise existing powers. So it's anticipated that an executive paper on the policy will be shared in September, and the bill hopefully be brought to the Assembly before the end of its current mandate as well. So that is the plan at this stage, and I know that the committee has indicated like a briefing on the results of the consultation, so I'll make sure that happens and that officials can come to committee once that analysis has been completed. So I'm keen to work very closely, given I suppose as well the significant amount of work that is on the back of the All Ireland Rail Review, and hopefully we're looking at expansion of our railway services. So I think this is very important, and actually attending the event this evening with the Railway Industry Association. I know, Peter, you're hosting that, so I think it's quite timely as well. Then obviously the Reservoirs Act is something that the committee have been looking at very, very closely. This, I suppose, just to say, is a hugely important piece of legislation, and I suppose I'm proposing to further commence and implement the majority of the Act through 5 pieces of secondary legislation. And in October last year, the executive agreed to progressing that legislation. I know the committee are still considering the SL1s and have had numerous briefings from officials in relation to that, and have recently received the further information requested from NI Water. So I suppose just at this point, I think it's important to stress again the importance of this legislation due to the ongoing public safety risk that remains while it is not enacted. I know the committee have raised some concerns and questions, particularly around grants. So I hope to date that sufficient information has been provided, because I know there has been extensive discussions with officials. You'll see from the consultation that I'm focusing support on those reservoir managers who need it. So that will mainly be private reservoir managers and not-for-profit sectors. But again, I think it's important to say that the grant scheme can't be established until such times as the legislation gives the department the powers to establish a grant scheme. So hopefully we can get that moving. So that's another one that I'm keen to progress at the earliest possible stage, particularly given the public safety risk.
Okay, just final one, if that's me. 2 weeks ago, Minister, we heard from officials in your department relating to the active travel spend. We know that every pound is a prisoner in your budget year on year. So given that 10% of it is statutorily required now of the overall transport budget is to be out on active travel, how are you as Minister ensuring a sensible and fair and well spent taxpayers' money on these schemes? And I ask that in light of the scheme that I raised with you in person and I've raised with your officials in Newton Abbey and White Abbey, which is a new £500,000 and counting fence along the promenade that I'm told is now the industrially accepted norm. And if that is the industrial accepted norm, which I believe is fundamentally far too excessive, then your budget is going to be gone in weeks if you have to replace every fence to that standard. Can I get a commitment from you that that's not going to be the way it's going, and that we will see some rollback on that?
Yeah, well, I think in particular that issue, and I have met with some members in relation to that, and officials are currently looking at what could be changed, because I know there have been concerns. And I think that not every scheme is going to be requiring that type of fencing. What I will say is I think that there's there's a variation of what projects are included through the active travel spend. I will ensure that this is spent properly and that we are getting the best value for the money that is allocated to the budget. I think we have seen some of the really positive schemes that have been done so far, and I suppose just there's 7 kind of main schemes that are already underway, particularly around greenways. The North West Greenway officially opens in September. We're due to open the Carlingford Loch Greenway in September this year. Officials are actively engaging with Causeway Coast and Glens Council, North Down and Ards, and Fermanagh Omagh in terms of plans for Portrush to Giants Causeway, Cumber, Newton Ards and Sligo and Skillen Greenways. So there's a significant amount of work going into that. I suppose some of the other schemes that we've seen, we recently saw the Stranmillis embankment, the cycle lanes, and I think it's fair to say it's a really high quality upgrade and is well used already. We were out on it with the team last week. And I suppose in respect of reporting against the requirements that you've outlined, overall spend within the department is in the region of 45 to 50 million. So that's currently about 5 to 6% 6% of the overall transport budget. And I suppose in addition to spend on new active travel projects, we also have to ensure that existing, and I think I mentioned this in the Chamber this week, existing schemes, infrastructure are well maintained and upgraded as well. So that is all part of the spend that is currently ongoing and will happen in the future. I think that is very important to people, and we've had some questions around things like the inclusion of street lighting and upgrading the road surface and footways, and that is an important aspect of this too. So there's so many things that go into the spend that's been allocated to active travel, to not just provide new options for people, but to upgrade what's there, but also to make them safe and accessible, so to encourage more people to use them. So I'm confident that we can do that in a responsible way, and that money will be spent in a way that will make a real difference and certainly enhance the active travel options for people on the ground.
Okay, well, just a comment on that before I hand back to the Chair
quickly.
very quickly. I mean, I know I've raised it with you and I know officials are looking into it, but while I accept there's been some really good spend in active travel, this particular scheme is deeply alarming. The consultation wasn't there. It's excessive given where it is, and if this is now the accepted standard, Minister, every single cycle lane and roadway that straddles our promenades and seasides up and down this country are now going to have to be expected to be having this fence as a standard. If that must be reviewed, and I would urge you to please look at that with your officials and to do some rollback on this scheme, because it just simply cannot be the case.
Well, if I just say, just in terms of consultation, I know because I've had kind of detailed discussions with officials in relation to that, there was significant consultation with council. I mean, it's
with
on
officials,
record.
It was one meeting. Yeah.
Well, there was more than one engagement that I have on record. But regardless of that, I think every case will be looked at on its own merit, and I think that's important to say. Not every case will require that. But from the department's perspective, we also have a standard that has to be met, and that is important too, and that is in place for lots of reasons. So whilst I appreciate, I know this is a significant cost, it is something that we are currently looking at,
okay.
And I think given the budgetary constraints, it's something that I'm cognizant going forward.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Chair.
thank you. Cahill?
Thanks, Chair, and could I welcome the Minister and thank her for our commentary this week, and she's been busy in the Chamber between statements and question time and urgent orders, and more importantly your commentary around the support for those families who have lost loved ones on the F5. My first question, Minister, is really in relation to the Fiscal Council's report. Clearly the emphasis is on bridging the gap as opposed to introducing a model to address the issues within NAW. So the question is, can you comment on the findings of that, given the fact that no matter what model out there, there's going to be challenges and problems with any funding model?
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly welcome the report. I think it reinforces what both I and John O'Dowd have said before me in terms of alternative funding models for NI Water. They have clearly said that of course there are challenges with the funding model that is in place, but that is in relation to the lack of funding available. But what they have also said is that the only alternative they can see are funding models that require domestic water charges for householders here. And even aside from the fact that I and the executive has also said that they won't be implementing water charges, they have said that isn't a solution anyway. We have seen the challenges that have happened and the difficulties that has presented in other jurisdictions. So I think it's fair to say that those alternative models are widely acknowledged as failing. So I think aside from the cost for householders, there are lots of other issues with that, which is why I think the existing model for us is the best way forward. I've said this in the Chamber as well this week, and I think it's important to reiterate that, you know, when we talk about domestic water charges, this isn't just that, you know, it'll be an extra £10 for people or whatever. Significant money, especially for those lower income households. And not only does it have an impact on households, it has an impact on our economy. There's also a huge cost for the implementation if you were to introduce water charging. So for me, I think that it's certainly just not something that we should be doing. It's not something that I intend to do. What I have said, I think that we have to continue to look at how we garner increased funding for the existing model. and that's what I am doing. As I've mentioned the three-pronged approach. At every point, I am trying to ensure that we're getting significantly more investment into the department that we can direct to NI Water, and also working with NI Water to look at what other solutions we can come up with collaboratively around some of their plans. So, for example, I know that I've possibly mentioned some of the work that they are already doing around potential upgrades that had previously been costed, and they're now looking at how they could do that differently, which will still have a positive impact, will increase capacity, but at a lower cost and potentially a shorter it'll have a shorter time frame, but something that we can then go back to at a later stage. So I think we have to think differently. It's something that we have to do right across government in terms of our plans and how we do things based on the budget that we have. We all have to live within our budgets, and it is very challenging. There's no doubt about it. Already in this session we've outlined some of the key issues impacting on public services, particularly our roads, our wastewater, and we have to ensure that we are still delivering on the budget that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. And the other one's on the forensic audit report. I mean, going forward now, I mean, clearly you made a statement in the Chamber that day. How do you ensure those, good, constructive relationships working with NIW going forward? And your opinion on how do you see possible multi-year budgets, improving budget management between the department and NIW?
Yeah, well, I suppose protecting public funds is of the utmost importance to me, and whilst some members in the Chamber this week have said, felt that it was maybe not worthwhile, I do think it's worthwhile. I think it's something that we all need to do in terms of relooking at how we are spending money, where we can make possible savings, and how we can do things differently to live within our budget, but also to continue to deliver. So I don't think even in terms of NI Water, I don't think it should be seen as a bad thing. I think that it has just shone a light on maybe areas for improvement. And I've spoken to the chair of the board this week and outlined that I'm committed to continuing that work with NI Water. I think that there's things that we can improve on that will make a difference. And if we're able to make savings right across the board, whether it's NI Water, whether it's within my own department or any other public body, then it's all worthwhile, because collectively those savings could make a huge difference to investing in our public services. So I think that there's things that we can do, particularly around planning with the budget that's been allocated. And then you mentioned there the multi-year budget, which will put everyone in a better position, I think, in terms of planning. We can make greater efficiencies in terms of the work that we're doing. But I think that we have to be realistic with what the budget is and what is actually achievable and deliverable. So I think there's learning for everybody coming out of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cathal. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, folks, for coming in this morning. Obviously, there is a lot of major issues which we need to discuss, and none more so this week than the A5 project, which is a serious issue and very, very alarming indeed, right in the present time and also for future. I'm keen to know the impact this will have on other projects, including executive flagship projects, is something of great concern to me. I'm keen to establish your thoughts on that in terms of around the impact. When you were with us, Minister, in February, you outlined your 7 foundations, and I asked you were they in rank order. Foundation 1 was to tackle climate change, and Foundation 3 is adapting to the climate. So with that in mind, do you now accept that it was a mistake to back what were unrealistic net zero targets, which has had such an impact and caused such devastation, with the A5 project effectively being axed this week?
No, I don't. I think, as I said yesterday in the Chamber, we can do both, and I think it's important not to jump ahead and make assumptions about what this ruling means. The judge himself said this can be remedied, so I think that and again, from speaking with the DAERA Minister as well, I do think there are ways forward. I think it's important to recognise that we all have a responsibility to respond to the climate change, because if we don't, the consequences are going to be far greater. We're seeing it every single day. In terms of the A5, I think it's important that we carefully consider what the ruling says. There are key issues identified. I have said that I am optimistic that we can overcome them. What that will look like is not clear at this point, because we are still going through the detail of that. So I think it's, you know, we're hearing all of the potential solutions to this, but I'm not sure how many people have actually really closely analysed the ruling, because I know that both myself and officials in our legal team are still working through that. It's important that we do that to get a very, very clear understanding what this will mean, what the implications are, but most importantly, how do we resolve it? You mentioned other projects. I've no doubt that all departments will be thinking about this now, and it is something that going forward for new projects that we all have to think about. This has been the very first test in terms of the Climate Change Act. So there's no doubt there'll be learning for all of us in relation to that. But again, I don't think it's something that we can't overcome, and I don't think it means at this early stage that the agreement on the Climate Change Act, which was supported by the majority of Assembly members and parties, that it was the wrong thing to do. I think that we needed to do it, and we will deal with the outcome of that ruling.
But despite, as you say, the early stage, significant work has already taken place in that confirmation this week in the Chamber that the vesting orders have been quashed, and I presume work has to get underway to try and repair, you know, the devastation that has been caused in over 3,000 acres of land and over 300 farms. So work has begun, I believe. We got that confirmation. So, you know, is that project still alive as it stands, or is it not? You know, there's hundreds of farming families in that such a vast area, for example, that do need clarity, and that we have heard from them directly through joint committees several times, you know, about the lack of communication from this department particularly, and also from DAERA in terms of the impact that would have. So, you know, I think we need decisiveness as well, because is it happening or not? And this is going to be the same land. You know, it's now going to be quashed, so it's very significant.
Yeah. Well, look, we at this point in time, we're in the hands of the court's ruling, and we have to abide by that. And I've said that earlier, that, you know, once those orders have been quashed, then that means that land will return, and the department will be engaging imminently with those landowners impacted. But what I will say is, I am not giving up in relation to the A5. I will want to ensure that this scheme is delivered. We have to move ahead with it. What that would look like and how we get to that point is not clear yet, but that is something that we are actively working on to find the way forward, and to find that way forward as quickly as possible. So for me, this is a pause in the project, but I hope that pause will be short-lived, and that's why I have officials working on this proactively to find a way forward, and in collaboration with other departments.
Okay. Another issue at crisis under your watch is the wastewater and water capacity issue. The head of Invest and I said recently that it's the one issue that keeps him awake at night. You will know the feeling from the Fiscal Council report, the CEF, Chamber of Commerce, and many more people about the constraints that it's having on everyday society, including house building and so much more, and also on infrastructure projects. What else can you do? I appreciate your three-pronged approach and so on, and the developer contributions, but ultimately they will be passed on, and there'll be consumer contributions, because people buying new homes will ultimately have to cover that cost. So, you know, do you feel you've done enough, and what more can be done, and what more will you do in your over 4 months in office on this important issue?
Well, can I just say from the outset, this is not a crisis on my watch. This is a crisis that has developed. No, if you let me finish, this is a crisis that has resulted in relation to decades of underinvestment by our British government and a Tory austerity policy. I think that has to be made very, very clear, and it has not just impacted on my department, it's impacted right across all of our public services, be it health, be it education, and I'm sure many of your colleagues will feel the same. So what I am doing is looking at everything that we can to try and tackle this issue. We have made some progress. We are working closely to try and get further funding to ensure that we are delivering. That is at a slower pace than any of us would like, but it's my priority that we continue to move forward on this. And that's why it's so important to work collaboratively with NI Water and with others to ensure we're doing that. I've been meeting with construction representatives. You mentioned the CEF. I've been meeting with the NI Chamber and others in relation to all of these issues, and I've said to everyone, bring forward any suggestions. If we have missed something, if there's something that you think we should be looking at, I'm more than happy to do that, because I think it's having as many views and perspectives as possible is key to trying to solve this issue. The one thing that I am not I will not do is introduce domestic water charges, and until such time we find another solution or something alternative that will help, I'll continue to work on the issues I have already outlined, as you've said, in the three-pronged approach. I'm under no illusion that the developer contributions is not a silver bullet. I know it's not going to solve all of the problems, but should we just say, oh, we'll not look at it? No, I think we need to look at everything available to us. It's out for consultation at the minute, as I said, which closes on Friday, and we look at the responses to that and analyse that before deciding a step forward. But I hope that gives an indication, not just to the committee, but to wider society, that I'm looking at everything available to me to ensure that we find a solution that's viable, but that will actually make a difference. Developers are already having to pay to connect and find solutions to connect, and we're seeing that all the time. So I've no doubt that that's already impacting on house prices, but there's lots of other things impacting on house prices, on a global scale, the cost of materials. So I think it's actually unfair to say that will naturally be that will be the causation of a rise in house prices. So look, as I've said, I'm continuing those discussions with everybody, all stakeholders, to find a viable way forward, but one that will actually deliver.
Okay, thank you. And another crisis, moving on to another crisis, is on our roads. Now, I appreciate the roads maintenance strategy. It's something we've been lobbying for, and we do look forward to that being rolled out. We have, as you said, we've had over 11 years now of a limited service, which has had an impact on the condition of our roads, and it's reflected as well in the liability claims that have been paid out by the department. You mentioned Argent North Down, and I do want to recognise the work of the local section office there in terms of that area where there are larger patches of potholes, but it is worth noting that we're starting from a very low baseline, with that council being the least funded. So I suppose we just need to see, keen to know a bit more detail around the time frame of on your watch when we will get to grips with our roads.
Yeah, well, as I've said earlier, and I think as well, as it is important to say, this is another impact of significant underfunding for the executive budget and indeed for this department. So, which is why a limited service has had to be enacted for the length of time. I think it's something that none of us want to see and none of us will champion. But we have to live within the budget that's been given to us and find ways forward. The strategy, as I said earlier, is in the final stages, and I'm waiting for officials to provide me that finalised document, and so I'm hoping that'll be in the coming weeks, and we'll hopefully present that then.
Just finally, Chair, very briefly, just in terms of going back to the major issue of the week on the A5, would you, Minister, have done anything differently in hindsight?
Well, I think again that remains to be seen. We need to look at what the ruling means and compare that and analyse the evidence and everything that has gone into the legal challenge. I think it's important to say that a huge amount of work has gone into providing the strongest possible case. Some of the issues that have been outlined are things that we have never, particularly as in an assembly, have had to deal with before. And whether that is open to appeal or if we can find solutions without even having to go appeal, they're the types of things that we're looking at. So at this point in time, I don't think I could say that we do anything differently without knowing what we would need to do differently.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Members, just be aware of time, and if we can, Minister, if you don't mind, I don't want to curtail the conversation, but if you don't mind, if we can keep answers succinct as well. So, Andrew?
No, Minister, just taking back there the Sacred Heart there in Uri, so it was a bit more a different environment now. No, Minister, just real quick question there on this. You referenced the Downpatrick flooding, and obviously in Uri as well, but we're going to the climate and flooding thing tomorrow. I suppose, can the Minister give an update on where that is? Can the Minister give an update on resources that are being earmarked, ring-fenced, associated to that project? And again, can the Minister, given what we have seen unfold yesterday with the big infrastructure project, obviously a different context with the flood alleviation scheme, but can the Minister give assurances that the necessary sort of administrative groundworks, if it's not a poor mixed metaphor there, are being done, are being completed to ensure that can progress in a timely fashion?
Yeah, so you'll be aware that I recently made an announcement in relation to the report into the Downpatrick flooding, and I suppose given that at the same time it's something that has impacted in my own constituency, and I'm acutely aware of the devastation and the impact that has had right across the board, both largely for businesses but also for many residential property, and it's something that we have to be proactive on. And I think officials, particularly in DFI Rivers, have been working very closely with community partners, business partners to find ways forward. In terms of the Downpatrick flood alleviation scheme, so a number of options have been looked at. I think there was 14 options coming out of the study that had been investigated. That include dredging of the River Coyle and removal of the Coyle barrier, but those interventions have been found to be ineffective in managing flooding in Downpatrick. So it did identify solutions which will help to reduce the flood risk to the standard that we would be targeting for Downpatrick. However, the benefit cost ratio is quite close. So officials are currently looking at the solutions that would, I suppose, have the strongest level of protection, but also that are economically viable. So that was kind of where it's at, and they are taking that forward. I think it'll take about 6 months till we get to the next stage, and that's where they're working at. But I suppose just to say that, you know, from my perspective as minister, but also as a local representative, I know how important this is, and I've met with the Newcastle Community Resilience Group there as well, in terms of the issues impacting in Newcastle, and I'm keen that we do find solutions and get those implemented at the earliest possible stage.
Anything on the finances or anything on the...
Well, I think, you know, and that will depend on what solution we decide to go with, but you know, I'm confident that will be, the budget will be there for that.
Okay. Just, I mean, I want to also associate myself just with the comments about the work that the department does on the ground, the workers on the ground, and how easy, approachable, and all the rest of it. So I do appreciate that, and that reflects on your department for sure. But just coming back then, you know, to the sort of the one of the major big issues regarding NI water, and I think, you know, it's established that it's an issue. And okay, the three-pronged approach. I mean, I suppose what level of improvement, what level of targets, what level of monies raised, say, from developer contributions, what are your targets in relation to the three-pronged approach? What improvements are your gold standard?
So I think ideally what we want to achieve is the amount that's required to deliver what's needed, and that cost that has been outlined by NI Water has significantly increased in recent years. The developer contributions, as it is out for consultation, we need to look at that and see what comes back and what is actually achievable. And as I said earlier, I think it's just a smaller part of a bigger picture in terms of how we move forward in this. I think for me the biggest aspect in terms of getting funding and investment will be through working with executive colleagues, but also looking at how we can maybe engage with the British Treasury and others to get the support we needed. Because once this work is done, it's done. This is capital money, so you know it's something that it will have a lasting impact, and I hope then it will take us to a better place in terms of, you know, basic operating of something that is absolutely essential. I've said it here, I've said it before, both in committee and in the chamber. The programme for government outlines what the executive's priorities are, but in order to achieve those, I think it's important that our wastewater infrastructure is addressed. So for me, this is in itself an indirect executive priority because it might not be specifically outlined, but I think in order for us to do everything else that we want to do, this has to be addressed. So I think that's something that all ministers will be acutely aware of. I've already initiated discussions with both the Agriculture Minister and I know Minister Lyons is keen to have discussion around the housing supply strategy as well. So I'm working collaboratively with everyone because this is within all of our interests. I suppose the other thing to say is it's also looking about how can we take the pressure off our system. So it's not all just about physical infrastructure, it's about looking at what other solutions can we put in place to ensure that we're delivering properly for people, and that I think that's relating to the SUDS bill that has been introduced this week and looking at nature-based solutions. You know, from speaking to developers, some of them are already using nature-based solutions on a smaller scale. So how can we do more of that and deliver properly for people, and without having a cost, without having lots of physical infrastructure, and ensuring that we're having the best use of money. So, I mean, I think that members are often quick to dismiss what is on the table here, but let's test it. Let's see what we can do, and we can continually review that as we go along. I think it would be irresponsible to not try these out and see where we get. But I'm confident that this will make a difference. But as well as that, I'll continually be lobbying for additional funding, because I think that will help us to get that head start and get moving at a much quicker pace.
Just, I appreciate given the time and all the rest of it. I suppose that leads into the sort of the last point of the last question. The three-pronged approach. Some of us might use the three-pronged grape at some stage, for shoveling stuff about. At what stage do you get rid of the grape, the three prongs, and just take a shovel to it? I suppose that's.
Well, as I said, I think we need to go through this, and we need to there's a process in motion here. We are working through with the legislation. The contributions consultation will be concluding this week, and then we'll get the outcome of that. But also, I mean, you've seen we have put a bid in through June monitoring, and we'll continue to do that as such times. I mean, recently John O'Dowd had announced the additional funding that we've now secured for the next number of years through the comprehensive spending review. I think that in itself gives a really clear indication of where the executive is at, and I think that we will benefit in terms of wastewater from that additional 600 million, and I'll be lobbying very, very strongly to ensure that we do. So I think this will be a work in progress, but it's already underway, and as we progress through that and as we see benefits, I'll be sure to keep the committee informed of that.
Minister.
Okay, thank you, Keith.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks for coming along. I just want to start off, Minister, by saying thanks to the workers on the ground, the local engineers and all that do a sterling job, but they're hand-struck in money. We don't have enough money, okay? But I'll come back to that point. I want to go back to the A5 on the timeline. I have wrote down, you can confirm or deny these indication of dates. 2nd of October, the Minister announces the go-ahead, point number 1. Number 2, vesting order made 15th of October. 19th of October, the court case lodged. Then the vesting came into place on the 25th of November, and then Minister O'Dowd said on the 10th of December that he was going to proceed. Go ahead, okay. So what I want to know, what happened after the date of the 19th of November, whenever the department was aware that there was going to be a judicial review in this. So at that point in time, you didn't own the property for technically 6 days. So I'm not supposed that you, Dennis, to be fair, Liz wasn't there at that point, and the Minister wasn't there. What happened in that period of time? Because previously you said, and I'm admiring your honesty at the start, you give advice. Your role, I presume, Dennis, is giving advice to the Minister. So what advice did you give him?
Sorry, just to say I also received advice, because I didn't want to give the impression this was somehow me taking
fair enough.
a flyer.
So you collectively pulled all that together for the Minister. Based on the fact the department didn't own the property technically the 25th of November, the legal case started, presuming, the 19th of November. So what advice did you give the Minister and when?
To be honest with you, for that level of forensic detail, I'd need to go back and have a look at the records individually and come back to you on that.
So would you agree you pulled advice together?
Advice was going up continuously
to the Minister?
Yes, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
you said previously, Dennis, that you work under direct control of the Minister.
We work under the Departments Act. We work under the direction and control of ministers.
And there was a Minister in place at that point in time?
At which point in time?
On the 19th of October. Sorry, 19th of November, whenever the judge...
2024?
Yes, 2024. So, did the Minister make the decision to motor on with the road?
The only hesitation I have, and the reason I'd need to look at the paperwork, is did we go to the Minister and ask the Minister specifically a question to say, do you wish to continue on this basis? I suspect we did, but again, I'd need to look at the
So
paper.
you're assuming the Minister made the decision at this stage?
And if not, certainly the Minister would have been kept informed of the process. So, sorry, one of the questions would be the question to what extent some of these are operational decisions, so they're taken under the mandate that the Minister having decided to move forward on.
I need to know, Dennis, who made the decision to proceed.
Yeah.
It's
No, I think
hear me
we-
out. It's as simple as this, because I'm going to come to costs in a minute.
Yeah.
You evaluated and you pulled your department figures to present to the Minister or whoever made the decision. What was those figures? As in option 1, keep going. Option 2, stop. What's the difference in those figures financially?
I think we just have to. I'll have to answer these questions in writing if that's okay.
Okay.
But
Well-
can I say as a general point, just as a general point, to say the reason why I spoke up earlier is because as accounting officer, I have a specific responsibility to the Assembly for the money that's spent in the department. So of course,
But Dennis, the Minister makes the decision.
Oh, absolutely.
You as accounting officer, to be fair,
Yes.
advise the Minister to say, do it or don't.
That is
So what was your advice with respect to the A5?
I need to look at the specific submissions that went up from the Minister.
You can't recall at this stage.
I can't, not individual submissions at that level. I can't.
Dennis, this isn't a pothole in Cookstown.
I
This
get
is a £1.x billion
And
project.
indeed, there were a whole series of submissions that went through that whole period. And I'll be happy to look at our timeline and get back to you on it.
Okay, well, we'll have to seek clarity on that,
Sure.
Chair. We're now looking at, and my colleague referred to it as 3,000 acres that you have vested. And you hadn't invested when the legal challenge went in, technically. So you have 3,000 acres vested, 330 farms. Have you any idea what costs it's going to be to compensate those 3,000 acres? I'm not talking about putting it back to the way it was. I'm talking about, have you any idea, have you any ballpark there? Idea?
We'll need to assess that with the land.
Well, I'll give you some ballpark ideas. 3,000 acres, if you average £1,000 an acre of income a year, based on an average, that's £3 million. Whenever you cultivate and wreck land, as I referred to devastation in December, that's going to take 10 years for that land to be 100% productive. So 10 times 3 is 30 million alone just for the costs of the land, never mind putting it back. So it's vital to know what your decision was, Dennis, or information the Minister was, as in, we stop the contractor, it's going to cost X, or we risk this. This is going to be hundreds of millions of pounds.
I mean, I'm happy to come back to you with the specific dates and the times and the figures. What I would say is that the general decision, as I outlined earlier, is about whether or not at a point in time to proceed with a major programme. And when we're looking at this programme of work for the whole scheme, we're talking about a scheme, as I said, one of the biggest projects, in fact, the biggest project.
That's surprising, Dennis, that the Minister wouldn't make that decision then if it's one of the biggest projects.
I'm not saying the Minister wasn't responsible or didn't take decisions. We're working under direction and control of ministers all the time. What I'm saying is I just need to look. You've asked some very specific questions, to be fair.
Okay.
And I think it's fair, to be fair, we need to go back and just have a look at the timeline and provide you with those detailed answers that you've asked for.
I now want to move on to road safety, and appreciate the Minister. Thank you for moving on that issue with the bus stopping and overtaking the bus, and that's someone we need to look at broadly. But I think road safety messaging is in tatters, complete tatters, because I'm hearing and seeing young children holding placards say, roads kill. This is the policing board causation factors. Roads don't kill. Alcohol kills whenever you're driving. Drugs kills. Excessive speed kills. Using your mobile phone kills. Careless driving kills. And not wearing your seatbelt kills. That's the 5 causation factors of road deaths as of last Thursday, and your colleague was at the policing board. There's now a narrative, and I'm not taking away from any loss of life in the A5, and I appreciate if the A5 was improved or that will reduce road deaths, no doubt about that. But the narrative is now from young people, the roads kill, the roads don't kill. That's police statistics, them's not mine. That's the 5 causation factors of road deaths in Northern Ireland today. So the narrative out there is the A5 killed. I know it's people travelling on the A5 making mistakes, and engineering implications or improvements will help that. What are you going to say, Minister, to that narrative that the police themselves say is now in tatters, because the narrative is the road kills? That's the 5 causation factors.
So I think that it's important to say that mistakes can happen because of the type of the road as well. So that has to be reflected. Dual carriageways are much safer, and that is obviously why this road scheme has been approved and why there's been significant support for it, particularly from the executive at executive level. However, I completely agree with you. A lot of the work that we have to do is around driver behaviour, and every member around this this table today will have lobbied for physical, traffic calming measures, infrastructure measures to try and improve roads. So, and many of you will see the responses that I've provided in relation to specific schemes. What we have to do, we have to look at both in every case. So, road safety messaging is hugely important. I mean, you'll know that I recently announced launched the consultation around mobile phones while driving, penalties for drink driving and drug driving. We're looking at all of those things, and driver behaviour. The road safety messaging, I think, particularly around school buses, has been very welcomed, because it is helping to make drivers think. That's why I'm also looking at what we can do across with the Department for Education and the Education Minister in terms of helping school children understand safely when they're getting on and off buses and coming to and from school. That's why we're looking at active travel routes and making those routes safer, to encourage more people to walk, wheel and cycle to and from school or whatever it is they may be. That's why I'm introducing more 20-mile-per-hour speed limits, and I'm focusing particularly on rural schools, because I recognise significant safety challenges, particularly where there's national speed limit roads outside schools. That's why we're also looking at permanent 20-mile-per-hour zones in more residential areas. So there's lots of things we can do. I think we need to do where we can do those more physical measures, whether that's a roads upgrade to make a road safer in terms of the physical layout of a road. The A1 junction scheme is another example. There's absolutely no doubt that the layout of that road and the crossover points on that road have a massive impact on the numbers of deaths. I think they're not far behind the A5 in terms of the deaths that have occurred on that stretch of road. I travel it every single day myself. The crossovers on that road, people take chances, which is again associated to driver behaviour, but there's lots of other factors there, and the upgrade of that road will undoubtedly save lives as well. So we have a huge job of work. Driver behaviour is undoubtedly the key causation of road deaths, but things can happen, people make mistakes, and I think we have to look at all of that in the round. But you know, we work very closely with PSNI on the Road Safety Partnership and all partners. We have a massive road safety campaign which members will be aware of in terms of sharing the road to zero, and it is completely focused on driver behaviour and how we all have a responsibility. I'm also introducing graduated driver licensing, because unfortunately the figures show that the highest number of collisions involve young male drivers. So there's lots of work we do, and let me tell you, that's something that we are very focused on and continuing to work on every opportunity, and how we can look at lots of different aspects of that messaging to improve safety for everybody.
Back to the point I made at the very, very start, it's difficult for engineers in the area to get money. This decision is going to cost tens of millions of pounds. Do you agree or disagree? This wrong decision is going to cost tens of millions of pounds. So the difference between halting the project to the court ruling was made to now we know what cost is going to be incurred.
The flip side of that is that halting the project and then a positive judgment and then trying to restart it also had a significant cost. We could have lost contractors, costs of contracts would have increased. So I think you can't look at one aspect of this in isolation, and I suppose that's why Dennis is keen to look at the timeline and the submissions that led to the decision that was taken, because all of that has to be taken in.
Because I appreciate, Dennis, if you're producing information for the Minister, and I assume it's him made the call, and this will be clarified. We will see on a bit of paper option A or option B.
Certainly the Minister will have been aware of it. The only question in my mind is just how we put it to the Minister. That's the point. But what I would say is, with all these things, one of the challenges with major projects generally is there's an issue about risk management, and risk management sounds very simple when you sort of say it out loud. It sounds like risk registers and things like that, but actually you have to take risks, measured and appropriate risks, to be able to deliver projects.
This was a sure thing. You didn't expect the judgment. The difficulty with this A5 project, it's head or heart. I'm not saying it doesn't need to go ahead, but I think the heart overruled the head.
Keith, if you don't mind.
Okay,
we
and final point.
we do need to be brief here.
I know this is my last 30-second
yeah.
point, Chair. Have you looked at, based on causation factors, I'm not going to get into individuals, the tragic cases, based on causation factors, have you looked at upgrading the road that's there? Because each one of those statistics, unfortunately, will have a reason for the loss of life. Have you looked at the road that's there to upgrade it?
So the executive position is the road needs to go ahead in terms of
Well, that was the executive position, but we'll know what the cost is going to be now incurred shortly.
Well, for me, I think this is the solution that was the identified best solution. For me, the focus is ensuring no more lives are lost, and we can't put a price on that, unfortunately.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Minister, to lose one legal challenge is unfortunate. To lose two is careless, but to lose three is completely unacceptable, and some might say unforgivable. And with our sympathy and support for the families is assured, it's not something that we or you or the department can hide behind when it comes to accountability. And this isn't a criticism of you personally. This wasn't your decision, and even if it was, as someone who was on the receiving end of a few quashed decisions, it's important that you don't take it personally. But would you agree that your department, or your predecessor even, has repeated avoidable mistakes, has ignored expert advice, because the PAC did give clear, reasoned and specific recommendations that appear to have been either completely ignored or brushed aside without proper analysis or justification, and that there was a failure by the department to work with others and coordinate on climate act duties? Now, you said your predecessor met with the DERA minister towards the end of last year. Is that then after this scheme had been approved by the minister and by the executive?
No, so I suppose firstly to say you've outlined three legal challenges, all of which have been taken on in terms of different grounds. This third legal challenge is on something that has an act that has been passed by the Assembly in more recent times. So that was never in place ahead of the previous legal challenges. It was 2022 Climate Change Act, as you'll be aware. Your colleague was the minister at the time when the act came in. So I think that we have moved into a different space in terms of what the issues have been that have been put by the applicant for this particular legal challenge. But look, let me say, in terms of the meeting with the minister, I'm aware of that was one of the last engagements that he had with him. However, I don't agree that there wasn't collaboration. There was very close collaboration with the DERA at official level as well, and that had been ongoing from the conception of the scheme. And as I've said this morning very clearly, that continues. The department liaises with DERA on environmental impact assessments or wildlife issues, impact on farm payments, and most recently in the production of a letter that was issued on the 9th of April this year in relation to single farm payments to all the landowners affected by the A5 order. So I think that it is completely unfair to say that there was a lack of engagement. We've been working very closely and will continue to do so. In terms of the legal challenge itself, so as I've said repeatedly this week, we will analyse what that judgment says. We need to look at where the issues that the judge has identified lie and how they can be resolved. Again, I don't think it's insurmountable. I think that we can overcome this, and that's my focus, because at the forefront of this is our families and the people that are using the road continually every single day. We need to get past this, and we need to get this work done. So we can sit here this morning and say who's to blame. We don't know where the issues lie until we go through that in great detail. But for me, it's about finding the solutions, Mark.
No, sorry, Minister. I said that the failure to work with and coordinate with others was on climate act duties, and if you've outlined there where there was collaboration between DFI and DERA, but it's on climate act duties, and that's what the judge found.
Well, I've talked there in my response around the environmental impact assessments and all, so that's all part of that work, because that's relating to climate.
Well, for example, what measures were incorporated within the scheme for carbon reduction in terms of, for example, materials and vehicles even to be used in construction? Because I know at the core of anything that even our council here in the City in Strabane, and I presume others, go out to tender on. Sustainability and carbon considerations are core to that.
All of that was
what-
considered as part of the work on this, Mark. Everything that you've outlined there was considered and was presented to the court. So what we need to look at now is why the judge felt that fell short and how we can remedy that.
It was considered and presented to the court, but what was done beforehand? Because it's my understanding that when stuff went out to tender, there weren't questions around sustainability. There weren't questions about what type of materials would be used, low carbon materials, low carbon vehicles and things like that, which is just absolutely barmy in 2025, whether we climate act or not.
Just to say on that, I mean, it's more of an administrative point, but the procurement processes use the latest approach, and they become more sustainable over time. So when we were going through these procurement processes, we'll of course build in sustainability. It's probably also worth saying something about the scale of the carbon emissions. So there was detailed evidence, and it was acknowledged in the judgment about the amount of carbon emissions that would be involved in building the road. And of course, there are always going to be carbon emissions in any major project, capital project. The really a big focus was about how then those carbon emissions could be mitigated in the context of an overall carbon budget and how we reduce to net zero overall. So a big focus on this was, of course, the department's role in those emissions, but also it was about how that fitted into the wider plans to reduce to net zero and whether we could achieve that, in the context of those plans. And that's why there's a piece of this that goes beyond the department. There's a very clear focus for the department, but there's also something then that goes beyond that.
I think all of that information is available on the department's website in terms of what was looked at in relation to the scheme. So what I will say is, again, a lot of information has been provided. I think I said earlier on in responses to other members, there was hundreds of pages of scientific evidence provided. So I mean, that gives you the level of detail that was provided, and that was all worked on in collaboration with DERA officials and as well. So I think until we get a clearer analysis of everything in the round, and look at maybe were there gaps, or should we have provided more information, it would be unfair to say that because we don't know that at this stage is essentially what I'm saying. The department provided as much as information as possible at that point in time, and again have worked very closely with their officials. So we also need to look at the interpretation of the Climate Change Act in terms of the judge's ruling and what he felt maybe wasn't there, or why he felt that those grounds were upheld. So again, Mark, I think it's very early stages.
Yeah, well, we do know that there wasn't enough. There might have been hundreds of pages, but that the quality mightn't have matched the quantity. We know that, or well, the judge certainly. We know that the judge felt that, and it's not about blame. This is about accountability. It's a major executive flagship project with a cost of £1.7 billion, not to mention the I suppose cost to those families who've lost loved ones, and I suppose the hurt that this has caused them, where we've had this scheme announced again, trumpeted, like it was announced just prior to the election.
Mark, I think we know the issues. I do have other people on my list here. If there are any other questions, can you please come to them very quickly? And I'm obviously asking just for the answers to be succinct as well, Mark.
There are a lot more questions, but I don't have any great. That'll get answers to them, so you can move on, Chair.
Okay, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister and Dennis, for attending the committee here this morning. Just in regards to the A5 obviously runs right through the heart of West Tyrone, and as a representative of West Tyrone, myself and many constituents share your disappointment, Minister, and honestly, so many people are really devastated by this ruling, because we know that delays do cost lives. We've all seen how families have been completely torn apart by deaths in this road, and communities have been torn apart. because simply the A5 road as it stands now is not fit for purpose, despite what others might say. And again, I would like to pay tribute to the families of those that have lost loved ones on the road and that have continued to campaign to see this road upgraded. And I'd also like to thank you, Minister, for your commitment to overcoming the obstacles that we're facing right now and to ensuring that the A5 road is upgraded. I would just like to ask you, I do understand that it's very early days and that you, your department, have only had sight of the judge's ruling in the last day or two, but maybe you could give us some idea of what your and your department's next steps will be, please.
Yeah, so I think this week I met with officials briefly, I suppose, in the immediate aftermath of the ruling on Monday, and we've had a discussion of what the next steps are. So I know that Legal Counsel will be meeting with officials tomorrow in terms of a consultation on the analysis of that. That will be a very detailed discussion, and then on the back of that I've requested an urgent briefing immediately after, whether it's tomorrow or Friday at the earliest opportunity, as well as a written briefing in relation to that. So that will hopefully help us to identify what the next steps will be or what the options are to realistically help to move this forward and find solutions at the earliest possible stage. So what I would say is that as we move through that process, and I hope that will move at pace because it is too important, we will endeavour to ensure that we keep both the committee and the Assembly updated as to once we've agreed where we are going next with that.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for keeping us updated. And I must say, I do think it brings some kind of solace to those people who have been really devastated by this here news, to know that you are kind of working at pace to overcome these obstacles. So thank you. I just want to move on to another topic because that has been rehearsed now a lot. Yesterday, your department launched a public consultation into the transport strategy for 2035. Can you outline the benefits of this strategy and basically what changes you'd like to see because of it?
Yeah, so I think the launch of the strategy has probably been lost because there's been so much else happening, and I do think it is a really important document, and I hope that members will engage very comprehensively with it. It covers the period up to 2035, and I think it'll be fundamental to the growth and the development of our society in terms of how we develop a more modern, efficient and a sustainable, which we've talked about today, a transport system that I think is essential for not just for connecting communities but also for future prosperity right across the north and indeed across the island. So I think it will help to shape a transport system that works for all, and a key part of that has been putting people at the heart of it, and I've talked earlier on around inclusion, and that is around people with disabilities and other issues that might at present hinder how they can get about. So I think it's important to look at the priorities of people right across our community. So the purpose of the consultation, I think, is important because it will help to generate debate on the issues and help to improve the strategy and ultimately the transport network. And I know the committee in particular will have lots of suggestions and proposals in around that, and I'm keen to hear from everybody and indeed the wider public in relation to that.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And just finally, Minister, you touched upon this in your briefing about the Reservoirs Act. You know that the committee have been discussing that at length in the last number of weeks. So I wonder, can you just give us any more detail in relation to it, the need to progress the work at pace and how important it is for safety measures, essentially? Yeah,
so as I said, I think it can't be underestimated just how important this is, and I know officials have made this very, very clear in terms of the briefings that you will all have received. This is a matter of public safety, and we need to get the legislation enacted to ensure that we can protect the public from the issues that could arise if a reservoir was to breach. So I suppose it's really just to emphasise the point on the need to move this forward and encourage the committee to work with us in relation to that, and hopefully sufficient information has been provided.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Lastly, Peter.
Thank you, Minister. I look forward to seeing you later this evening at the rail event. I'll rattle through these as quickly as I can. I've been deleting as I've listened to the conversation. Your department published a roads prioritisation programme in 2023. Will you be revisiting that to sit alongside the transport strategy?
In terms of the major roads, yeah. Well, look, I suppose we've already made some announcements in terms of our intention to proceed with some of the schemes. The Ballynahinch bypass being an example, the A1 upgrade, as I've talked about earlier, and obviously the A5 is also a part of that. So I think the transport strategy is a very high level document, which is why there's no specific mention of schemes in relation to that. It's looking at how we can transform our overall transport system, which incorporates all elements of transport, whether it's rail, road, active travel, and all of those things, again partnered with the other objectives that we have as a department. So my intention is that we are continually working to what has already been agreed and how we can continue to progress on the schemes that have been identified in time ahead.
Flags have gone up in East Belfast last night and over the last number of weeks as well. What engagement have you had with the police in terms of flags being erected on DFI assets?
So, I mean, I know this is a very important issue, and I met with Bobby Singleton and some of his colleagues there 2 weeks ago in relation to this, because there are so many different nuances as well, I think, to some of the, not just flags, but some of the other paraphernalia and signs and things that are being put up, not just on DFI infrastructure but on other areas as well. So for me it was about finding a way forward and an agreed process or protocol of how we deal with those things, and there are different aspects to that. So we are currently officials are working closely with PSNI in relation to that, specific to, I suppose, things around hate crime and racism and things like that. There are probably clearer pathways. Where the grey areas is around cultural expression or what is deemed as intimidation or hate or racism as well. So at present we're looking at each case in isolation and assessing that and looking at what the best approach is where possible if there are issues caused, and it is we're assessing risk and all of those things that come with that. So that engagement's ongoing, and as I said, I've met them just in the last number of weeks and how we move forward. And we have been getting contact from people right across the north on similar issues, and we're feeding that in and dealing with them individually.
Is that in the hope to produce new guidance, or?
So I think it's about agreeing a way forward and looking at what the police can do within their remit, where DFI need to step in. We also looked at was there a potential for an external contractor, which has proven more difficulty in some of those more contentious issues. For me, it's about ensuring that all our public spaces are safe and people don't feel intimidated or under threat or whatever some of these things. And I'm not just particularly referencing flags or anything, I suppose just in the general context that public spaces are inclusive for everyone. So it's looking at how we can deal with that, but not just in isolation, but looking at it sensitively and respecting that in terms of culture as well, and how what is the best way forward in that.
The definition of active travel came up in writing a couple of months ago, I think, when the active travel unit came in. Are you going to be publishing details about what you consider the active travel spend? I know it's causing a bit of concern that footways and streetlights could be prioritised over schemes. So given that you've published the definition of what active travel is, are you going to be publishing what the spend is to give clarity to the sector?
Yeah, so I think we have said in many, I recently met with Sustrans and I've met with other stakeholders as well. So the spend, we have the active travel delivery plan, which officials are currently analysing the responses to the consultation in relation to that. So that final plan will be presented to me after the summer recess. So I hope that will maybe provide further clarity in relation to that and look at what we prioritise. But I think the concerns that may have been raised in terms of how that spend is being implemented, I've alluded to it earlier on, that active travel spend is not just about putting a cycle lane in place or putting a new footway that's connecting. We need to ensure that they are safe for people to use. So that part of that will include ensuring that it has the proper street lighting, proper surfacing, or for existing active travel routes that they are properly maintained as well. So that forms part of that. It doesn't mean resurfacing roads that are nothing to do with active travel, and I think that clear distinction has been made.
I suppose the argument back to that is from the active travel sector is that you have budget for those things in terms of streetlights and footways and things like that. And I totally take your point in terms of using maybe a bit of the active travel budget to facilitate safer active travel. But the argument is that you have budget in other areas that you're able to use to do those things rather than the active travel budget itself.
But I think if we have to put that in context. So, in terms of the spend, if we are particularly if it's a new active travel infrastructure and we need to put in street lighting, that has to be part of that because that's part of that scheme. So I think you have to look at it in that context. Whereas we would be more challenging to look at the street lighting budget overall is very, very limited. So that's not the reason for it. I think it's important to add, but I think for us to properly implement active travel routes and infrastructure that are actually accessible and safe for people to use, they have to be part of that scheme.
To touch briefly on what Keith was mentioning earlier in terms of road safety, I was part of that briefing as well, and it was mentioned about graduate driving licenses, and you've mentioned that, yeah. But it was highlighted that that's been going on for a while now. So are we going to have any clarity as to when that's going to be introduced?
Yeah, so I think it's something I'm very keen to see. I think it's definitely an issue that will certainly help. I think where it's at the minute, and just let me get the detail on it because I don't want to give you the wrong detail. It is a very resource intensive piece of work because we have to look at current driving, training, testing, and testing arrangements, and then there's obviously the work that comes on as part of that. There was an estimated 2 million of capital required over a 16-month period because of the need for the programme training and the logbook. I know that officials are currently developing around a digital app because obviously that would be more accessible, particularly for new and younger drivers. So I'm hoping to be able to provide committee members with an anticipated date of introduction fairly soon. We're just waiting on the preparatory work to progress sufficiently. So and that will require some SORs and things like that as well. So it's quite. I think it sounds that it's very simple, but there's actually a lot of work required as part of that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Increased fines for speeding as well was mentioned. Is that something your department currently has?
Yeah, so we're looking. We've looked at as well increased fines for drink driving and mobile phone use as well. So we're looking at kind of a lot of that. The consultation is currently out on the mobile phone uses, as you'll be aware. So and drug driving is the other one. So we're looking at all of that.
And then just lastly, or Frank Mitchell will come after me. You'd mentioned to the Vice Chair earlier about the road defects. It was mentioned in an audit office report, I think last year, about risk-based sampling and a recommendation from the audit office as to what the department could do to make better use of money to address those road defects. Is that part of the strategy that you mentioned to the Vice Chair earlier?
I don't know specifically if that audit office report is part of it, but I think generally, in terms of how we target investment and ensure we make smarter maintenance decisions, that is the basis for the strategy. So I think overall it will help to see better decisions and more sustainable repairs.
Part of what we'll be looking to do is implementing the recommendations from the audit office report.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. You've been very patient with your time and we do appreciate it. These are big issues. So, but Minister, just before you go, I have asked for officials to come for a meeting with the committee in relation to A5 and hopefully you will agree to that, okay. Minister. And also just to say, Permanent Secretary, Minister, if you don't mind coming back in relation to the timescales, those are very, very important just in relation to the clarity of the overall decision making.
We could come back with a timeline and just and set out what was recommended in mine.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, members, we're just going to go now back to item 3, and that was Chairperson's business. But beforehand, is there anything else anybody wants to pick up on after that session?
Yeah, Chair, are we clear that we're getting an exact timeline?
Well,
an exact cost analysis, what the decision was based on? There'll be a paper, I don't know how much that's presentable to us, but there'll be a paper that's been presented to the Minister to make a decision. We need to see a copy of that.
Yeah. Okay.
Because there'll be an option A or an option B. Yeah. So somebody made the call. I mean, this is not an expensive fence with respect to John. Mm-hmm. This is going to cost tens of millions of pounds. This decision.
It has major implications.
Somebody made it.
Yeah. No, we make sure that those points have been communicated to the department, to the Minister's office. Okay.
Just to add, there is a lot of questions that do remain unanswered. You know, I think the significance of this decision can't be underestimated. The impact that it has had on the A5 and could have on so many other projects,
Yeah.
you know, for future generations is very, very serious.
We don't know what's going to happen then. Enniskillen bypass, it was due to start
To
in
name but a
summer,
few, yeah.
you know, and it's city deal money as well in relation to that too. So there's high stakes involved here.
If we could chase up, Chair, as well, and I asked it in the Chamber yesterday as well, the contractual obligations and the relationships with the contractors who were on site and were expected to be on site post the preliminary works. How is that impacted? What are the potential breaches of contracts? What are the buyouts of those? All that needs to be factored in, given that we don't know the overall timescale.
Can we see a copy of the possible letter you're going to send if we have any comments? Is that appropriate?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no harm
Just
in that.
because there's loads of little bullet points.
As long as members come back very quickly to that.
If you put a timeline, if we don't come back, you go ahead.
I mean, I'm placing trust in members to come back in relation to that, because obviously we are cantering towards recess as well. It's important that we get some of the answers, and obviously I have asked for officials to come up. We're hoping that they will be here next week as well, and some of these further questions can be put at that meeting as well, but we need to have clarity. Mark?
It's just in terms of the follow-up on the A5 stuff and the timeline that Keith has been dogged and asking for. I think it is a good idea. But if we could also get something like the recommendations of the PAC outlined and the actions of the department related to each of those recommendations.
Okay. Okay, everybody content? Yeah. Okay, we're moving on to chairperson's business. So I just want to let members know that myself and the deputy chair did have a pre-brief yesterday with the minister in relation to the forensic review of NI Water, and obviously we were all in the chamber in relation to that particular report. And then draft minutes, we're moving on to draft minutes. At page 6 you'll see the draft minutes of proceeding of the meeting on the 18th of June 2025. So I'm just seeking agreement that members are content the minutes are true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 18th of June. If so, I'll sign. You content?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Item 5 is matters arising. Does anybody have any matters arising from the previous meeting? No? Okay. 6 is correspondence. At page 18 you'll see the correspondence memo. At page 23 you'll see Department for Infrastructure correspondence regarding DAERA consultation on Northern Ireland's first climate action plan 2023-2027. Very appropriate at this moment in time. So I'm just seeking agreement that we receive oral evidence from the Department for Infrastructure on relevant areas within its remit at a suitable date in the forward work programme. Are you agreed? Okay, at page 211 you'll see Department for Infrastructure response to committee request for details of repair costs to Northern Ireland water reservoirs. So you will see there was 11 sites, 11.6 million, 250,000 on average on well maintained. Oh, so sorry, 45 sites. Apologies about that, 45 sites. So I'm just seeking agreement that obviously we'll be aware that the grant scheme is out for consultation at this moment in time. That was one of the key things the committee was concerned about, and it might be prudent just in relation to our scrutiny work to look at the conclusion of the consultation proposed grant scheme for reservoir repair. You agreed with that? I can't move until you, Okay, thank you. At page 217, correspondence from Cornerstone relating to mobile infrastructure planning challenges and solutions. So members, just before we move on planning, obviously we have been looking at, we have asked the Interregional Planning Commission for an update. They thanked us for the interest in the report. They have sought further input from a number of stakeholders, taking on board the comments that we made to them in in the Infrastructure Committee. So as a result of that, it's impacted upon their timescale for finalising the report. So the Commissioners are currently working on it. However, they're now coming into holiday season, and a final meeting for them has been scheduled for the 13th of August to sign off on the report, which will then go to the Minister for her consideration. So obviously that's part of it. I just wanted to give an update in relation to that element, and then I'm seeking agreement that we get some more written evidence from Cornerstone just to the committee in the first instance, if that's okay. Keith, do you want to add something?
So it'd be good to, I don't know when we can do this, get these people to have a chat, because I've instances in the past where a lot of these telecoms people want their own mask on their own site, and the legislation says masks share or site share where possible, but they don't want to do that, and they want to move away from rural. They want to go down the side of the road so they don't have to pay, which is fair enough, but they're not always abiding by the current rules. I'm not saying referring that to Cornerstone, but I'm talking broadly. So would it be more informative if we get these guys in or not?
Whenever you're talking there, I think we do also have correspondence from Mobile UK that had come in before, so maybe it might be worthwhile to have both.
Well, yeah.
Maybe, if that was...
The mobile thing's a bit of a problem at the minute, I know, but
it does relate to a planning issue.
The signal is dying or disappearing. I don't know what's happening, but it is a problem.
So then get an oral evidence scheduled for both of those, or are those people that have been in touch anyway? We can look back just
you could cover the plan a bit and the coverage. You cover it all.
Yeah. Okay, content with that then. So we're getting an oral briefing just in relation to that. Thank you. Okay, at page 225, you'll see correspondence from a member of the public relating to the responsibility for post-19 provision and associated concerns. So I'm just advising members that there are a number of further emails with the exact same content which has been received, and would appear that this is part of an ongoing campaign which has been issued to a number of committees. So we might just want to note that within the exchange of the correspondence issue, it has already been considered by the Finance Committee and its response has been outlined. So I'm just seeking agreement to note. Are you content? Yep. Okay, so is there any other comments that anybody wishes to raise on any other items in the correspondence pack? Or the meeting pack, sorry? No? Nope. Okay, so I'm just seeking agreement that you're all content to note the remaining correspondence as contained in the correspondence memo. Content? Yeah? Okay, we'll now move on to item 8, which is Northern Ireland Water Forensic Financial Review, Department for Infrastructure oral evidence. Today we're welcoming to the committee Declan McGowan, Deputy Secretary Water Departmental Delivery Group, Susan Anderson, Director of Finance, Damien Curran, Head of NI Water Shareholder Unit, Claire Kennedy, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Andrew Wilson, PricewaterhouseCoopers. So as per usual, folks, I'm just seeking your agreement that the evidence is recorded by Hansard. Agreed. Okay, thank you. And sorry, I noted Andrew there, but I don't think Andrew's with it. So
he's unwell.
Okay, well, please pass on our best wishes to Andrew. Thank you. Look, thank you very much for joining the committee today. I did indicate this to the Minister, but we haven't received the report. So that sort of curtails our scrutiny of the report itself, and we look forward to seeing it, but it is disappointing obviously that we don't have the written report with us today. So if you don't mind, I'm going to invite you to make an opening statement of 5 minutes, and it will be 5 minutes, and then I am going to come to members' questions if that's okay. Thank you.
You'll be reassured it'll be less than 5 minutes, but I'll cover it anyway. So look, good morning, and see it's just still good morning, Chair and members. Thank you for the invitation to brief the committee this morning on the outcome of the investigation into potential unauthorised resource budget overspend by Northern Ireland Water. And thank you for the introductions. I am joined this morning by my colleagues Susan Anderson, who's our Finance Director, who you've met before, and Damien Curran, who's the head of our shareholder unit, who oversees Northern Ireland Water. And as we say, we're also joined by Claire Kennedy from PwC. As members will be aware, PwC was appointed with a specific role to undertake an independent review of how Northern Ireland Water managed its resource budget in the 24-25 financial year. I'd like to put on record our thanks to Claire and her team for carrying out this detailed investigation and for producing this report for us. As you know, the Minister made her statement to the Assembly yesterday and confirmed that the report is being prepared for publication and will be published in the next few days. In her statement, the Minister reiterated her intention that any learning from this investigation will be useful for all parties and help prevent such an occurrence in future years. As explained within the report, any direction by the Board of Northern Water to overspend without the prior agreement of the Department is technically a breach of managing public money NI. Had the Minister not taken her decision on the 27th of March to allocate an additional £3 million to Northern Water, which was just 4 days before the end of the financial year, then Northern Water would have overspent. At this very late stage in the year, Minister's decision to redirect funding to Northern Water to overdress its overspend was at the detriment of other essential public services that the Department delivers, such as vital road maintenance that would have benefited all of the people throughout Northern Ireland. The Minister set out yesterday the 3 key learnings coming out of this report, namely that Northern Water needs to plan against the budget it actually has been allocated rather than against a greater amount that it does not have. Northern Water needs to manage pay better, and Northern Water needs to manage fluctuations through better financial profiling and supplier management throughout the year. In relation to this third point, you'll have heard yesterday that if Northern Water had been able to negotiate even an illustrative 5% saving in goods and services procured through suppliers, it would have coincidentally almost equalled the amount of overspend through a saving of 1.2 million. Finally, the Minister advised yesterday that the report points to further work which would be carried out and she'll take time to consider over the weeks ahead. I hope that you find this helpful and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Declan, much appreciated. And yes, do want to put on record thanks to PwC in relation to the work that they did do, particularly in the timescale, because it was quite a confined timescale to do the work. I suppose not to diminish the work, but it is something that we have taken substantial evidence in relation to NI Water. And I feel like we sort of know what the issues are. It's just dealing with those in the aftermath. So really, in terms of the key themes, they're not a surprise to anybody. And so I'm just wondering, was there anything, because we don't have the report, was there anything that raised an eyebrow for yourselves that did come as a surprise whenever you were going through the investigation?
Not a surprise as such. No, I agree with that. And, coming into it, it is clear that, all of the multitude of stakeholders that are involved in and around Northern Ireland Water are very cognizant of, the budgetary constraints that, the company, faces. And, looking at NI Water, you're right, there are limited levers, for them to pull. In our report, we did see some particular areas, small areas where, we're recommending more work could be done to look at them. But again, those are relatively limited in number compared to the total budget. So not a surprise, but recognising the difficult position that they are in. I think Declan has called out, the one area that would have been pay, and that's the one area they obviously had accrued the pay award in 23-24, and the payment was made in 24-25. The option was there, and that's what the reference is made to, not to make the pay award. It was an option, but we're not saying that was an easy option, at all. And we've heard from the board that they were faced with the threat of industrial action. So again, not easy decisions that were having to be made by the company.
So Declan, there in your opening statement you said about the breach and potential breach of managing public money, which is really, really serious in terms of that, and I suppose with anybody there should be consequences that follow in relation to that. Is there any options that yourselves have put forward now in terms of potential consequences to the Minister for her to look at as well as a result of the report?
Chair, the spirit of this report was very much about drawing out the learning to prevent it happening again. We do now have that learning, albeit we don't have the final report. But, you know, if I were Northern Ireland Water looking into this year, as we know, are 1/6 of the year already, I'd be looking at how we manage overestimations. I would look at how we manage pay, and I would look at how we negotiate with contractors so that we don't arrive at this position next year at the end of the financial year. So in short, this was more about taking the learning and making sure we avoid it happening again, rather than looking to, you know, sanction anyone at this stage. It was an unfortunate occurrence. It's the first time it's happened, and from that perspective, the notion for us is going forward is how do we make sure that doesn't happen again. I would imagine Northern Ireland Water can speak for themselves, but I would imagine Northern Ireland Water will be looking at those aspects and saying, are we overestimating? Can we pay the pay award at a different speed or rate or whatever? And can we look to negotiate with our contractors? That's what I would do.
So in terms of obviously managing public money and breaches of that and the themes that are contained within the report, just for clarity, it is a pay issue in terms of monetary value where there is a main concern. Am I correct in that? Okay. And then, Damien, I suppose this question is maybe pointed to you because you're obviously head of NI Water shareholder unit, and I'm just imagine that you've had obviously ongoing regular discussion with NI Water. Are they accepting of this? And, you know, is it a case of that they are breathing a sigh of relief and they will get off scot-free and they go, you know, yes, Minister, we'll take this on board, but how do we ensure that this is not a reoccurring theme? Because as far as I can see from what I have heard so far, the themes can be replicated for so many other public bodies. This is not just unique to NI Water. So I suppose how come they're the target here on this forensic accounting?
Yeah, well, I would echo what Declan and Claire have just advised. You know, there's learnings to come out of this report. It's been a very difficult journey, I feel like, you know, in terms of what Northern Ireland Water say they needed to spend against what the budget allocation was. And I think that's going to be a key learning in terms of ensuring that budget allocation. There's always going to be hard choices in terms of what that budget allocation is allocated for and whether it's sufficient. But that's right across all public services, I would imagine. But equally, in terms of monitoring spend and aligning spend to that budget allocation, that's equally important, and that's effectively what the report's trying to elaborate on in terms of the decisions and decision making of Northern Water's board in relation to ensuring that their spend and public expenditure was aligned to the budget, the approved budget from the Minister. So going forward, that's going to be one of the sort of the key focuses in terms of governance, if you like, in relation to the Department's oversight of Northern Ireland Water and its use of public expenditure, and equally its reporting to the Department in relation to public expenditure. That's going to have to be, very carefully, scrutinised and oversight, if you like. In addition to the oversight that we already apply to Northern Ireland Water, which it's already very intensive.
Sure, can I just come in? Sorry, apologies for cutting in there earlier, but this was not about target, and this was specifically, the department has responsibility for a number of arm's length bodies. There are a number of arm's length bodies and bodies linked to the department and the wider civil service. This was a body that overspent, and because it overspent, we had to address that issue. I'm in the civil service 30 years. I've worked with a number of arm's length bodies. I've never experienced it. So this is why it's been done. It's not a case of target. It's just simply a case of this was the only ALB who decided to overspend.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, folks, for coming along today. I think probably not reserve judgment, but it'll be good to come back to this discussion once we see the full report. Yeah. And I think we'll probably have even more questions than that. But just on the preliminary announcements and the statement made yesterday, the Minister made reference to around item 3, around the fluctuations of contractual arrangements and suppliers that had just 5% been saved. It would have covered the overspend. How realistic was the 5%? Where did that come from, and what, in terms of the analysis and the investigation, could well have been saved had that been done to its fullest, if that makes sense?
Well, I take that was purely an illustrative.
Oh yeah.
That was purely an illustrative percentage. Where our analysis went to and what we found was we predominantly focused on the other spend category. Because you're looking at the other big categories, you've got power, you've got staff, you've got your PPE. Do you know a lot of those are, there's factors involved there which are outside of Northern Ireland Water's control, whether it's power costs, whether it's weather. You all know that.
Yes.
So apologies for telling you that again. So the area, other costs, what is in there? Is there potential optionality, within that? So we looked through a number of different nominal ledgers, and can I just say that Northern Ireland Water were extremely helpful and very engaged in the process, and I do want to thank them formally for their engagement with us. Everything we asked for we got, and in a very timely manner, acknowledging the 6-week period with which we were looking. But our focus was to go through the nominal ledgers for all of that, the other spend. We also asked them for the largest items of expenditure, so those items of cost that would have made the biggest difference potentially. We pulled back a number, or asked for a number of their contracts, extracts from their contracts, and it was there that we identified that I think 18 out of the 21 we looked at, were call-off agreements. So just by their very nature, there is the potential for optionality, variability in there, depending on business need. So there may be discretion within there, but I think it's important to point out that within the 6 weeks, we're not able to conclude on that. So, we have not finalised our report, as you well know. Yeah. Our conclusions, our recommendations are still, a work in progress. But, I'm sorry, can I also say that Northern Ireland Water do a lot to manage their supplier spend, but we're saying there may be an option, to look at those, I think they're SME call-off contracts, to see if there's potential discretion, respend in there. There may not be, but there may be.
Okay. That's useful to know, because we as a committee know that they're the biggest consumer of energy, for example, in Northern Ireland. So the question I put to the Minister yesterday was around, are they availing of economies of scale? Are they doing, and I know they do a lot, but given how much they're consuming, is there more that can be done? But does the report go into that level of detail?
So we look at electricity in quite a lot of detail.
So we'll expect that.
And, we know, and the department knows as well, that they are looking at hedging, around their electricity contracts, to try and reduce their exposure to volatility in the energy market.
And the other point I wanted to go to, Chair, if I may, is just around, I think it was the first point, certainly the first point we get the brief on yesterday, which is around their planning around hopeful allocation of funding versus actual allocation of funding. And I know it's difficult because they want to do everything they want to do. How did that piece work, and how was it factored in whenever we take in your monitoring round allocations of funding? So would you have expected them to do a plan with what they got versus a plan with what they hoped they got, and then a plan with what they hoped they'd get in the in-year monitoring round? Because a lot of this stuff is capital intensive and it takes a lot of prep, so I'm sympathetic to how difficult it is for NI Water. So I'm just conscious to know how that worked and what you'd expect from them in that regard, if that makes sense.
Well, maybe I just make a general point, John. As a department, as all of our business areas, our ALBs, etc., they all are allocated an amount which will not be exactly what they need, but that's the amount they have to budget against. Northern Ireland Water produced an operating plan on what they needed and sought to work against that figure, not what they were allocated. And that's where the gap started to emerge and where there was divergence, and as Claire's report points to, almost 80 million over a 3-year period of what they felt they needed versus what they actually needed. Sorry.
Did they expect, Declan, just on that, did they expect, for example, the money to come in your monitoring round, or had they just done a plan with what they wanted and forego whatever might come down the road?
Yeah, they would probably hope that money would become available, but they should, through monitoring round, but experience has shown that isn't always possible. I'm going to bring Susan in a moment on the technical issues of this, but they should, no matter what, and I would say this to all of my divisions, you work to the budget you've been allocated, not the budget you wished you had. Sorry, Susan.
Yeah, I suppose just in the monitoring round point, it's something that we cannot guarantee that we will get funding, as you know, in a monitoring round, so we bid for it, and we bid, as we were here a couple of weeks ago bidding in terms of this year's June monitoring round. We put in a lot of high priority and inescapable bids, and indeed so do other departments, so we would never recommend planning on the basis of getting something through a monitoring round, because we know it's not guaranteed.
Okay. Claire might know this in through the investigation. Was this a more recent occurrence, or had year after year they've been basing their plans based on what they wanted rather than what they were getting? Or is this just the last 2 financial years, or
three?
Three. Okay. But there'd been no evidence of this before, so was that a deliberate tactic, did it appear, or just a decision at some stage taken to create a plan based on what they hoped for rather than what they were getting?
My understanding is that, every year they prepare their operating plan and budget. It does go back to the assumptions that have been put in, to the price control period. So it's not that they've just pulled them, out of the air.
That.
My understanding is it is a very, detailed process, that they go through. But obviously in the past couple of years, it has produced a number that has been bigger than what, they have been allocated.
That's all for now. Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cahill.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much. My favourite subject. I'm delighted that this exercise was carried out, and there needs to be learnings from it. And I agree with all you've been said, and listen to how the other members are asking questions. I mean, when you're around this 17 years and seeing the amount of money that's been invested, and it's a big organisation and needs to be. But my 3 points since coming out of the statement the other day. The first point in terms of working with the department is there a trust issue now, and how do we get over that? The other 2 issues mentioned that day was actually the overspend and how we avoid it in the future, and then the overestimation, which others has mentioned, because those are the 3 key elements that has come out. How moving forward, and I mean, I know as Damien mentioned, governance issue. Is it a governance issue going forward, or how do you think we'll address those? Because those are the 3 issues which really highlighted the other day in the statement. Yeah, thank you.
I'll take those. Cal, I got your name right this time, Cal.
Thanks very much.
Apologies.
I'll turn around this side. Okay.
So is there a trust issue? Yeah, we work in good. It's not a trust issue. We work in good faith with Northern Ireland Water. We have very good relationships, albeit that we have the challenge of trying to stretch the money to fit their needs. So there's no trust issue there. It's about how we work together going forward. The overspend, how do we avoid it? I mean, as I've said, we're 1/6 of the financial year in. Currently, Northern Ireland Water have an operating plan pointing towards 172 million, which they've shared with us. We're looking closer to 149 million as an indicative allocation, as you'll have heard before. So there's a gap there. So I would hope, and I'm sure it is going on as we speak, that Northern Ireland Water will look at the points that have been highlighted by the Ministry, and indeed by me this morning, and seek to ensure that they look at that 172 and how they bring it closer to the 149. And I would imagine that's happening as we speak. And then the overestimation point, that's something that's related to the operating plan. That is to look at, if I can characterise it like this, a lot of the overestimation for me when I say it is probably that they work it on worst case scenarios. If it were me, I would, and I've said this to colleagues in Northern Ireland Water, I would look more of a time series over the last couple of years and try and see what has generally been the temperatures, the weather, the rainfall, etc. And if it goes oddly towards a higher rainfall or higher winds or something like that, that's something like Storm Ione last year. They could bid to the department. I'm not saying it will be successful, but they could bid. So in short, I think if it's a question now for Northern Ireland Water, if I were in Northern Ireland Water now, I would be looking at the operating plan and looking to recost it to bring it closer to the 149, now that we know what are the main issues at play, but certainly no trust issues.
Okay, happy enough,
Sure,
Cahill?
yeah, thank you.
Okay, very good. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in. I suppose, just we're sort of conscious that we are sort of haven't seen the report, and we're sort of reading an abridged version of the Minister's statement, essentially. So, I suppose the first question I have really is that does this, as taken, we'll call this the statement rather, does the statement contradict the assertion that we've seen that NI Water is operating efficiently? Because we've had meetings with NI Water and they've said they're efficient and all the rest of it. So does this report sort of directly, contradict that? And are there, are there suggestions for minor improvements, and can those minor improvements fundamentally change really the issue at hand with NI Water then?
Andrew, I'll pick up the efficiency or inefficiency or whatever way you want to look at it. So the efficiency is in comparison to other water companies. So it was originally, a number of years back, 49% was the gap. Northern Ireland Water have worked tirelessly to reduce that gap, and it's down closer to 5%. So they're certainly much more efficient than they would have been years back, and probably 15 odd years back. So yes, they're operating more efficiently, but I keep coming back to the point, this is about operating within your budget, so that's what they have to look at. And sometimes you can close the gap on efficiency because somebody else becomes less efficient, and therefore there's probably a mixture of all of that going on insofar as the companies, the wider UK companies, are becoming less efficient, Northern Water is becoming more efficient, and the gap closes by doing so. But that is a different point to how they manage their budget. The managing the budget is, you have a budget, work to that budget and do it. But if you were more efficient, then you could obviously close that gap further.
Okay. Sort of on the board not managing budget, and the board, I'm sort of half quoting from this, the Minister's statement, if that makes sense. The board not managing budget, board's basing decisions on the larger amount needed, and Price Waterhouse Cooper, Miss Kennedy, sort of based that as a significant limitation. Just again, can you explain that again? We have just like a wee in parenthesis quote from Price Waterhouse Cooper. So I'm just wondering, can you explain that to the statement? If that is okay.
So it comes down to being able to monitor their budget, and in particular the resource. In this case, it's what they're monitoring it against. Northern Ireland Water are monitoring it against the operating plan and budget, but there is the departmental amount, which is obviously lower, so it's which are you going to sort of monitor it against. So there's a constraint, we're calling it a constraint against monitoring it against the departmental number. Now to be fair, we have seen a lot of really detailed financial analysis where when things got really difficult, sort of November, December, January, they were looking very closely at how the Ardell gap was coming down, and they were tracking that. It's just their starting point that we're calling out, not the fact that they didn't go on to track it, and how they were reducing down their resource requirement.
Okay. Again, going back to sort of one of the wee in parenthesis, it's NI Water consider recalibrating costs to fluctuations rather than the passage of time. And that's the passage of time as Price Waterhouse could put it. And again, can you explain that?
That could, in its entirety, the passage of time bit relates to the assumptions, and the assumptions which they have to make because they don't know how much power is going to be, they don't know how much rainfall is going to be, and therefore it does impact on their business. So the passage of time bit, so that wouldn't be a direct quote from our report.
I think we're just getting the fact that there's an abridged version here, and it's very, very difficult, and I'm just trying to check that what you guys are saying sort of marries up to what the statement is saying, and it's hard to get your head around without the full.
Yeah, if I could just develop that slightly, if you indulge me. The passage of time reference, there is wording in the draft report of passage of time.
There is.
What we take from that is that they have overestimated at the start for eventualities that I've outlined earlier that may or may not happen, and then those things haven't happened, and as time passed on, we didn't need as much, if you see what I mean, and therefore the figures went down rather than actively doing anything, almost passively waiting to see if the world isn't as bad as we thought it would be. And I know that sounds like an unfair way to portray it, but that's what that means.
Okay. Yeah, I think so.
To be continued. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for coming in. When has DFI brought in forensic accountants like this before?
I'm here 4 years, never.
Not in my time either.
So I don't know, Peter.
Maybe other departments. When have they done it?
I can't speak for other departments. I don't know. I think because it was an overspend, because it was a breach of managed public money, that we felt that was the course of action that needed to be taken.
Yeah. So obviously we don't have the learnings or the report, but the sense that I'm getting today is that the overspend was quite small in comparison to the wider budget. Is that fair to say?
You could portray it that way, but if you're sitting as the department trying to manage a quite tight budget, which is well documented and well rehearsed in this room, when we're sitting in February and being told we're going to overspend by 7 million, then we're told a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, it's going to be 5, then it's going to be 3, and all the while we're trying to juggle so many other issues, then the significance of that becomes much clearer. For me, personally, overspending by £1 is overspending because you're breaching managing public money guidelines. the fact that it's 1.4 million, that's what it ended up being. But as recently as the 27th of March, 4 days before the end of the financial year, it was 3 million. So this movable feast of we need this, we need this, we need this, makes it very difficult for us as a department to be able to switch on and off and direct funding at that, particularly at that late stage. And that's the significant issue of it.
So they overspent 1.4 million. How much did it cost to bring in forensic accountants?
That's commercially sensitive, so we wouldn't do it. But I did notice a comment on Twitter yesterday evening, and
it wasn't me.
I know it wasn't you, Peter.
It wasn't me.
No, it was Twitter. So to be clear,
they're all coming out of the woodwork now. Get that recorded.
To be clear, it was nobody in this room. But the comment pointed to how much this cost vis-a-vis the less than 1% overspend. But the overestimation of 80 million over the last 3 years vis-a-vis how much this cost, without getting into the figures, is probably about 0.1%. I think that's good value for money to make sure this doesn't happen again.
And I noticed your use of worst case scenario in your response to, I can't remember who it was to now. But is planning in terms of worst case scenario, and is that not appropriate for someone like Northern Ireland Water? We're working on the reservoirs bill at the minute, and they came in and Jonathan McKee showed us the maps. And they have to organise themselves based on the worst case scenario, because if a reservoir goes wrong, police need to be informed, ambulance informed. So is it not appropriate for Northern Ireland Water to operate in that way?
You always have to prepare. Every business area in government will have to have contingency plan in place. Of course it does, and you have to prepare for the worst. If eventualities such as that happen, such as torrential rain over a sustained period, or high winds, high heat, whatever, that's where you get into an abnormal occurrence that would typically be bid for to the department because of the abnormality of it. To look at the start of the financial year and continue with that figure well into the year, when those things haven't happened, and the realistic possibility is that they won't, albeit once or twice they do, then to me, I would be recalibrating, I would be revising my figures as we went along to say, how realistic is this? I would also personally look at a time series, as I've said before, and said, well, how often does this happen? And if it doesn't happen that often, you would build in that error at the start and certainly recalibrate as you go along to make sure you adjust. That's what I would do.
Has Northern Ireland Water responded to that in terms of the approach?
To be fair to Northern Ireland Water, they received a draft of the report, as did we, so they've fed their comments back. They are factual accuracy comments, I must be clear on that, and so those comments are being factored in, but they wouldn't be able to be drawn on whether they agree or not, whether they'd be able to say, well, that's factually accurate. The heart's been characterised and portrayed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Keith.
Okay, thanks for coming in. 2 questions. It's probably for you, Claire. Can you educate me on the process involved, the time involved, and the team involved?
Yes, no problem. So it was a six week period. That way we were brought in. So it was a team from PwC, and there was a team of 4 of us. We submitted an extensive document request to Northern Ireland Water, very much focused on financial management information, on financial reports. We looked and asked for board papers, executive team committee members. We reviewed a lot of correspondence back and forth between NI Water and the department, specifically on the matter of the resource budget. We also spent a lot of time with NI Water, and they gave us a lot of time. We met with the executive team, we met with the chair and each of the non-executive directors as well, to cover our terms of reference. And then equally we met with departmental officials of a number of occasions as well, so that multiple voices were fed into the process.
Okay, thank you. Second and final question. There's a bullet point here in the Minister's statement the other day, and it referred to you've done an analysis of the top 5 suppliers.
Yes.
Okay. Certain costs incurred are arguably optional, and NI Water could have chosen to not incur the cost. What's an example of those?
That's what I referred back to you earlier. It's when we had identified the call-off contracts that were in place, so the 18 out of the 21 that we had requested. So again, we were saying there's potential optionality in there. Obviously, it depends on business need. We didn't have the time, to test that, so we can't conclude on that specifically. But we're just saying, by the nature of those contracts, there may be optionality within those contracts.
Okay.
Specifically, within that other costs and SMEs.
We'll get you back in August.
Excellent.
It's not for me to say, is it? What if we get the full report?
That was the third
We'll be
question.
here.
That was the third question from Claire. You
I'm
don't
going to
need
book
to
my
answer that
holiday
question.
as I sit in the
No,
building.
thank you. Appreciate that.
Look, thank you. I just want to come back on, I suppose, 2 points, if that's okay. And the first one is in terms of the spending. Department would have an oversight of that in terms of how NI Water, you know, suppose the overspend. So where is the line, just for clarity, in terms of stepping in? You know, obviously we have this report, but it's doing something about that. That's the key thing that I keep coming up back to.
Yeah, so Northern Ireland Water has its own chief executive and its board, its own accounting officer, and therefore it is for them to manage line by line how they manage their budget. Is for us to observe and to look at where they're heading towards and overspend through their own communications with us. We intervene on that perspective to say you need to look where to pull back spend, slow down spend, or whatever. It is for them to choose where that should be. But the operational independence is for them, and as they have their own accounting officer, it would be for them to decide which budget heads would be the ones that they could turn off, turn down, turn off completely. You know, that's their choice, but it's for us to say you need to live within your budget. And when we become aware of that, as we did in the last financial year, it's for us to intervene to say you must pull your spend in.
Okay, I suppose the very sad life that I live. I do carry these reports with me at times, particularly for the likes of committee meeting like today. One thing that the Fiscal Council, I had them in last week, one thing that I noted was transparent. They noted about greater transparency around DFI's indicative and ultimate, and we've sort of touched on that in the committee today, and I suppose the difficulties of keeping track of that. It's very difficult for us as a committee to keep track of that, and there's I suppose different layers and levels and looking at it. Was that something, Claire, that definitely came through in terms of any discussions, the investigations that you had with NI Water, which would then make it difficult for them on their plan? I know we've touched on this, but make it difficult on their planning, and then ultimately create that overspend or near to an overspend situation. Just because I find it interesting that the Fiscal Council have noted that, and it ties in together with some of this.
Could you rephrase the start of that question? Sorry,
Yeah,
Deborah.
it was just the greater transparency and the ability for NI Water to be able to plan based on what they may or may not receive, and is that playing a factor in terms of creating that basis of an overspend? It may not be directed to you, but I just want to check if that was something that came out from NI Water.
Maybe, Chair, if I pick that up in the first instance, particularly around the transparency issue. So as members will be aware, we would have briefed the committee on the 24-25 budget process, and indeed then we had our equality consultation as well. So that clearly set out those initial sort of thinkings around how the budget would be split up in the very early days before formal and final decisions were taken. And again, members will be aware from those previous briefings, you know, we had requirements of 676 million at the start of the year against a budget of 559. So clearly some very difficult decisions were needed. And at that point, that's why obviously NI Water was given the budget allocation as set out in the equality documentations that were consulted on. You know, so it should be very transparent, and we're very clear about being very open about those budget decisions that are published as well.
Claire, was that something that came up in discussions with NI Water? Did they see any difficulty in how they were seeing what they were going to get and then manage that, I suppose?
I mean, I think it goes to a slightly, you know, to a broader issue than just the budget. The budget is what it is. Yes, there was an ask for more. I don't know what the right word is. It's more detail to what sits behind it, and I guess, you know, coming out of that, it comes down to service delivery and what is being asked of NI Water and what is, you know, affordable. And I think, you know, there is again, you know, a general consensus that, within the regulatory process that does exist, I think, the sort of price control process that is coming in, the sort of review that is coming in, the opportunity for all sort of parties to coalesce around an approach to managing service delivery, within affordable DEL, I think would be a good opportunity if that could be, availed of, which might be helpful, to NI Water, because the numbers in some ways are what the numbers, are.
Yeah. Sorry. You finished, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Deputy Chair,
just
so you were looking
just
in
came
the
into my
point.
head. Was there any investigation into how NI Water would benefit from multi-year budgets when it came to addressing these three key areas? Because obviously we accept, and I'm sure the DFI officials know this too, that it will be a lot easier, particularly for arm's length bodies, to better manage. It's not easy doing it year after year.
So that was outside the scope of our review, so it was very much focused on 24, 25, resource budget in particular.
Okay.
Thank you. Cahill, you were looking on the wee point.
Yeah, Chair, it's great. It's opened up the conversation. Just to clarity, come back to this thing. And I've said this to Declan on a number of occasions because, and it's grand, and the budget's there and they're constrained. But my issue is this: is that the PC21 reviewed. It's now a 3-year programme, and it's been signed off by the utility regulator. And I'm just trying to get my head around all of that, what they put in plans, what their ambitions are, what the targets are. And we're still not getting it, other than we're having the money to do this and do that. This piece of work has interrogated some of that and it's outlined some of the challenges that's in there. And I mean, it's really a point, I suppose, to put you on the spot to ask you a question, because we need to get to that point. There's been, 6 price controls? 5. There's a number of them anyway, but it doesn't matter. Over a 17 or 18 year period.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're still there. And see, for the size of the place, to be honest, in my own personal opinion. And that's the challenge for us as a committee, to try and get down that. Hopefully after this piece of work we'll get a better understanding. Budgets aside, we all know there's a challenge, but it's getting to know their work programme. It seems you got all the papers and they provided everything you needed to address that issue, but it's getting a better understanding of it for ourselves, how this is all operating, to be honest with you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, look, you'll be glad to hear that you're in better time than what the Minister was before, and I'm sorry for keeping you waiting, and look, we look forward to seeing the report. I would imagine coming out of the committee there may be some questions, and we may ask you to come back to the committee again, just obviously for our scrutiny of the report whenever we see it. So look, thank you for coming today to the committee. We appreciate your time, and thank you, Claire, and your team for the work that you did do in relation to this. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good summer. Excellent.
Okay, members, are you content? Obviously we haven't seen the report, so do you want to hold off, or was there anything in the intervening period of time that anybody wanted to check out on?
Just need to see the report.
I
It's
know.
hard, don't we?
I know.
Yeah,
be useful.
It's just disappointing we don't have it.
Yeah.
You know.
Chair, why is it commercially sensitive? I know it's commercially sensitive for all the companies, but there's a figure based on that, and it's a fairly large figure. If you do the sums based on the question I asked, you've worked out the figure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can put that. We can ask for a response.
We did it publicly. It's just to understand the value for money.
Yeah. No, we can ask that as a committee. Are members content with that? Yeah. Okay, moving on then. 9 is a public consultation on the grant scheme on the supervision and inspection requirements of the Reservoirs Act Northern Ireland 2025 written evidence. There's notification on page 264 of a forthcoming public consultation on developer contributions DFI. So I'm just seeking agreement that we schedule an evidence session following the conclusion of the consultation on the reservoirs, if that's okay. Yeah. And just to say, obviously, we're glad to see that consultation come forward, because it was something that this committee did question quite heavily on, because the grant scheme was a key concern. So. And we didn't really have a clear indication of when that consultation would actually come, so I'm glad to see that that is coming forward now. Then 10, we have a consultation, public consultation shaping sustainable places correspondence from the Department for Infrastructure. Page 287, notification on a forthcoming public consultation. Sorry, I'd read out the developer contributions for the last bit. We're going to seek an oral evidence session following the conclusion of the consultation to consider the summary of responses. Content with the just to get an oral evidence session in relation to shaping sustainable places correspondence, if that's okay. And then at item 11, we're going to our forward work programme at page 328. You'll see the draft forward work programme, seek an agreement just to proceed with the evidence sessions as set out in the draft forward work programme and to reflect any decisions taken today. Content? Yep. Yeah. Okay, item 12 is any other business. So does anyone have any other items of business that they want to raise at this moment in time? No? Okay. So item 13 is the date, time, location of the next meeting. It will be on Wednesday, the 2nd of July at 10 a.m. here in room 29, Parliament Buildings. Thank you, everybody. I now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Big spread next week, is Chair.
Committee Room 29. Sound.